left ear.
Yeah, that should be right. You should hear. Could you hear me in the same ear as you, or different ear?
I hear. Okay, that makes sense then. I
Yeah.
hear myself here.
They're on different tracks, and then after recording, I combine the track.
Okay.
It's in stereo.
That's kind of gross that I hear myself. I don't like doing that, but whatever.
See, the reason why it's good to hear yourself is so you can know that the quality and the volume of your own speaking is good the whole time, because I recorded the first like 25 episodes without. I didn't have the splitter. There's only one headphone input. So I recorded the first many episodes with only me listening to the audio, so I can make sure we're both. But it's better when the guests can listen to their own voice too, because they don't. Then they'll realize when they're being too quiet. Ideally, sometimes they still don't. But
yeah,
you have the ability to realize that you're talking too far away like this, and now it sounds diminished, versus like this. You notice the difference?
Versus this.
Right. Yeah. We're talking very closely. Yeah.
I think you should get like a giant head with like those ASMR ear things on them, and then like, because you know how like the ASMR people have like the heads that people can imagine that their head and they're going like this on the side and they're going all
like a 360 mic.
Yeah, but it's gigantic, so it reaches across the entire table.
So you want people to hear us in their ears where we're sitting? Like,
yeah.
I mean, you could do like a cardioid mic in the middle of the table and pick up the directional.
But it's gotta be so precise that it's like we're little like people on their shoulders, like speaking into them, giving them like influential tips and such.
Yeah. I mean, then it would sound like what you're hearing right now is the person listening would hear me in their left ear and you in the right ear. And I don't know. See, I record it in stereo and then convert it to mono because there's two separate tracks, which makes it easier to edit, because then mine is distinct and yours is distinct. And if I can erase my mouth noises while you're talking and vice versa. Whereas if I recorded an audio, then it would all be one track, and it's just
there's no
editing that.
Yeah.
Unless it's a moment that I can take out the whole thing. And then after it's edited, then I convert it down into mono and just put it all into one direction, which I think is better for the listening experience than having it in left and right ears individually.
Yep.
So, still haven't begun yet, but now we got that out of the way, I'd recommend for you to at least write down and think of and tell me, what are the overall topics that you would like to discuss?
Well, I didn't have much time to make it last night because I worked all day, and then my dad obviously wanted me to help him for like 3 hours of getting all his comic book stuff out of the way. I was going to do it there and then, but I plan on talking about some of the issues with philosophy.
Issues? Like problems in philosophy?
Yeah, problems like in the core aspect of it.
Okay.
In terms of like issues with the suppositions and logic and such. And also I'm just going to talk about like my personal issues with people that I know. Not like against them kind of thing. I'm just saying like how it's a noticeable thing that usually just having super strong basic beliefs that are illogical is extremely bad. And I don't really
religion.
know. Yeah, well, not even religion, just in general, like every time.
Unsupported basic beliefs. I mean, well, we can get at that, but I mean, all basic beliefs are unsupported. You said you wanted to talk about Descartes?
Yeah, I was thinking about so I was relearning over the whole story about Descartes and with his journey to the what's the saying? It's like
to Jesus?
No.
Cogito ergo sum.
I was trying to think of that because I was like, what's the
sum?
Yeah, cogito ergo sum, and how the whole story is about like him essentially pretending as if everything that he has doubts about could be an illusion from like some evil demon kind of thing.
He dumps out his basket of apples onto the floor and re-inspects each one as he puts it back into the basket.
Exactly, and then he's like, "I'm thinking, therefore I am," kind of thing.
Okay, so those are the things we don't have to talk about it right now because we want to do it in the proper timeline.
Yeah,
but say if you want,
I was debating things not
to keep your mind somewhat on the object of the conversation. You're debating not talking about that?
Yeah, it was more relating to the principle of identity in like the three logical things and how it actually couldn't be true. Like if you're debating if logic could be true and you're using certain propositions to have the same truth value, how ultimately you either have to accept both of them as being true as a supposition that I'm thinking, therefore I am. Well, that's not really a supposition. That's just he's trying to figure that out via like non-logical means. But you either have to accept that and the principle of identity, or not accept either of them. But that doesn't really work. But
okay, well we can get into that in more depth in a sec. So the timeline events usually that I go by, as you probably know if you've listened to the past episodes, is I begin maybe with a little bit of preamble, like, hey listeners, I'm sorry I haven't posted a podcast in a month and a half or more, and then goes on asking you to describe yourself to the audience, to give them some understanding of who you are, and then from there we go into the topics and spend as long as we can on each one until we run out of stuff to say on that topic, and then go to the next topic. Usually it's like 30 minutes per topic or so.
Yeah.
I don't really want to do upper bounds on time. I'd rather just do podcasts as long as it remains interesting and we have things to say, and then just stop organically. But
I like super long podcasts. Like that one. Well, the one that I watched for Chase's video is not
I mean, it's
a podcast, but
it's about primarily whether it's interesting and whether you enjoy the content, and the content is actually intelligible. You know, if it's a 17-hour podcast about like how grapes are grown, I'm gonna stop listening after a few hours.
That's different though, because that's like all one topic, but when like in podcasts you chunk it by like the timestamps of like here's this section, here's this section, here's this section.
Yeah. Or if it's even a 1 hour podcast about the great glory of God, I probably won't even listen to it.
I'd listen to that. That stuff's my favorite.
Unless someone sends it to me as a way of saying like, this is there's an argument in here that you need to respond to, because so it's like if it's some sort of intellectual responsibility to listen to it, then I will. But as like a matter of personal interest or like enjoyment, then I'm not going to listen to it. But if it's a 4-hour podcast on sleep and like the neuroscience of sleep and how sleep affects your brain and your body, then I have listened to that. And I would probably do it again because there's a lot of really good information in there.
Or if it's like a 4-hour long video expressing the truth value behind Noah's flood, I'd watch that.
Did you watch that?
I watched that. That was bad.
We could talk about that too if you'd like. Welcome to the Regular People Podcast. I'm Wade Allen, the host of the podcast, and today I'm joined by none other than Teage Allen, who, I'm Wade Allen. This is Teage Allen, so he's my brother. So this is the second brother to appear.
The youngest
podcast.
one.
Well, not my second brother in terms of chronology, but in terms of the amount of brothers that have been on this podcast so far. The youngest one too. Yeah, you're the youngest listener or guest. You're the youngest guest to be on this podcast. Because you're what, 18?
18, yep.
So I guess it's still, as of now, a podcast for adults.
I'm still technically an adult though, so
No, that's what I'm saying. Like you're an adult, so there's no minors on this podcast.
You should change that. Invite like some like 11-year-old on another podcast, ask them about like fruits and stuff. I don't know.
Fruits? Yeah. Well, okay. So actually, there was a thing I was thinking about today, and that I wrote down as a topic that I kind of wanted to talk about if we find the time for it. But I'll just quickly mention it here because it's relevant to that. If I say I had a 14-year-old talk about fruits or whatever, I had a 14-year-old on the podcast, do you think that because it's a 14-year-old, that would make the podcast less likely to be interesting?
I don't think it'd be less likely to be interesting. I feel like people would take it less seriously, though.
Less seriously? Okay. Another way to phrase the question is, do you think 14-year-olds have less to say?
No. Absolutely not.
This goes in the seriousness thing. Do you think, personally, 14-year-olds, well, you don't think they have less to say, do you think they should be listened to less? Like they have less knowledge on the topics that they're talking about, so that their words shouldn't be taken as seriously as perhaps somebody who's however many years older than them? Like, do you discount people based on their age at all?
I wouldn't say based on their age, but I in opposite of discount, I would count people more likely if they're older, because they're more likely to have like certain experiences. They're more likely to have certain professionalness with ideas. They're more, as a 14-year-old, you're not gonna exactly be like a
an expert on anything.
Yeah, exactly, an expert on anything. But you still have important things to say that affect your personal life in some way.
So what you're saying is, I mean, you could turn that around and think of that as being a discount, because compared to the 35-year-old PhD, they have more to say on whatever topic than a 14-year-old does, or more, relevant knowledge on the topic. But it sounds like what you're saying is, if you imagined this, I've been thinking in terms of graphs a lot today. If you imagine this as a graph, the value that you ascribe to the words of a 14-year-old don't go below 0, or like don't go below 1, perhaps. So it's positive value, but it increases, generally speaking, with the age of the person, or the life experience.
But it's not correlated to that. It's not like because someone's 35, they have more knowledge on this thing or whatever.
Yeah.
Unless maybe it's like math, and you took like some math class in high school and you have whatever. But that's due to the growing up of it. But like just because they're a certain age doesn't lead to them knowing more about a certain topic. Like it could be if you're, I don't know, like a child soldier. That's a vast example, but just saying like,
yeah,
just the fact that you're like, if I took any random 14-year-old out of the entire world and any random 35-year-old out of the entire world, the 14-year-old on average sure will have less general knowledge and things to say, but it doesn't mean that you should discount that entirely. They could have greatly interesting things to say.
Yeah. And I guess then maybe we will just talk about this topic right now, because we already are. There's a sense of which knowledge that they have more of, because it's like the sort of academic or like school learning that you would do. A 14-year-old probably is gonna be better at that than your average 35-year-old, because your average 35-year-old hasn't been in school for like at least like 15, 13 years, and they've probably forgotten a lot of things.
Sure.
So if you were asking any particular person about like, I don't know, like history or like math, even, like a 14-year-old might actually know more than a 35-year-old, because they're in a math class right now.
Yeah, it's like all those videos of like, are you smarter than
a fifth grader?
A fifth grader, yeah.
It's like a lot of the times they aren't, because the fifth grader is actually still learning, where the 60-year-old is like, he doesn't need to learn what the capital of Botswana is.
Exactly.
But then I guess on the other hand, there's the life experience things. So I was thinking, the younger my podcast guest got, would it be harder and harder to have an interesting conversation with them? And there's a point that's obviously true. Like, I'm not gonna have a 2-year-old on.
There's a clear difference there. But
I can't even understand more than half of what Saoirse, who is my niece, says. So having her on, and she's however many years old. How old is she?
5, 4,
something, 5 or 4. It's like that wouldn't even be a conversation, because I don't know what a goobadoo means.
I think there's a certain degree of like, just naturally as you grow up, you start to want to specialize in something. You want to. So back to your other point with saying like that it wouldn't be interesting. I think if you were to take if you were to make like a plot of all things you can talk about, generally the younger you go, the lower that will be, for sure. Well, like if you're taking like mathematics, philosophy, like ecology, all like certain studies of every single thing, right? I think generally the older you get, the larger that would grow, like over an entire thing. But individually, you could have a teenager that's great in one idea. Like they have put all of their free time into like looking into, I don't know, music is one of my examples, but music, or like I don't know, some really like agriculture, or well, whatever. I don't think I know any teenagers that like agriculture, but
I think it, like what you're saying, it would be primarily found in the realm of like talent on things, because I feel like somebody who's going to be talented at something like music or like a sport or whatever thing that they could sink a lot of time into, that usually takes hold at a younger age, and like there's diminishing returns if you're trying to be a professional saxophonist. The older and older you get, the harder it is going to be for you. Just like, or like ballet dancing, whatever it is, like you actually have an advantage being younger, and you're probably more likely to be a master.
I wasn't even talking about that. I know people that are like piano maestros and stuff like that, but they don't know much about it. There's nothing to say. Like like there's a difference between like knowing about something and being able to talk about it on a podcast and performing it, you know?
That's true. Yeah, there's a difference between being a good pianist and being a good music theorist. And like music theorists, you'd probably be able to discuss it a lot more.
Not even that. It's just like, I guess music theorist is like a branch of music, but it's just like stuff in general. Like you could do music history, you could say like music's effect on people, but you know.
Along with the thinking and graphs thing, the thing that I was imagining earlier today is, because there's like a common saying, it's like a popular wisdom kind of idea, that the older you are, the wiser you are, which I don't think is necessarily true. So I was imagining, like, how could you express that statement, however far that it actually is true, how could you express that, like, mathematically? So I was imagining a graph, because obviously when you're very young, you don't have any wisdom at all. Like, a 1-year-old is a nothing as far as, like, life experience goes. And definitely nothing in terms of being able to express that life experience. And it seems like it's true that in the beginning years of your life, it increases exponentially. Like, if you compare a 2-year-old to a 1-year-old, that 2-year-old isn't just twice as wise or learned or whatever as the 1-year-old. It's like multiple times more by however much. And then a 3-year-old compared to a 2-year-old, it's like still multiple times more. At what point do you think that exponential growth, if you agree that it is exponential, what point do you think that stops?
Well, I don't really. I would probably define wisdom differently than how you're describing it, but I'm kind of equating it to knowledge of more like what you're talking about here, because wisdom is more of like that. Oh my gosh, you know so much about like the deeper nature of things or whatever. But I'm assuming you're talking about just like general know-how of things. But as to when it probably like slows down or caps off almost.
Well, at least the exponential part. It could keep increasing, but not like to the point where the age difference is a huge factor, like it is with very young children.
Well, I don't think it's as much of like exponential, because there is like some part of that. I think it's more just like they have so little knowledge that when they're gaining knowledge, it's much faster. But at a certain point, their spongibility in the things that they can know starts to be limited, and they because like children are, as I always say, it's like they're like sponges and that kind of stuff. But I'm not sure they have that. I don't really know much about this topic, but it's like I don't think there's a certain time where it caps off. It just slows down a lot, especially probably as you start your teens, because maybe your faculties start to slow down. I'm not a psychologist or anything like that. I'm not sure, but
well, yeah, I'm not asking for your expert opinion. I'm asking for your personal experience sort of answer. Like, when do you think it would be? Okay, so I was imagining, and also I meant wisdom and intelligence, because I feel like these things are used interchangeably. Like, people will say they'll discount the youth in regards to wisdom and in regards to intelligence a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Not that that's the right thing to do, but that's what I see happen. So it's like either one of these you could think about. I was imagining it as a graph to be like a 3-part piecewise function. So you've got the first, I don't know when it ends, maybe like 10 or some age around there, or like 9 or whatever. You got the first chunk, which is exponential, of as age goes, there's an exponential increase in intelligence or wisdom or whatever it is, know-how. And then maybe somewhere along, like you were saying, the teen years, maybe it becomes more linear, where it's like a 13-year-old compared to a 14-year-old. There's still a difference, but it's not a huge difference anymore. And then I'm thinking somewhere around adulthood, it actually goes like in the opposite direction. Not like down necessarily, but like logarithmic, where it's diminishing returns. It reaches a point where like a 66-year-old compared to a 65-year-old, there's really no noticeable difference at all.
Yeah.
But like an 80-year-old compared to a 15-year-old, there might be some difference, generally speaking. And then also I was like, well, if you imagine this graph of exponential, and then it cuts, and then it stops that growth and goes to linear, and then it stops that growth and it goes to diminishing returns, it's like everything below that line is the possibility space, if you know what I mean. So like the average person doesn't have to follow that track, but they can follow that track anywhere beneath that line. So like it could be that any individual is at the top of that trend, and they're very smart their whole lives, like they're smarter than everyone else, and it's increasing, and then it kind of dips off into their later life. But somebody else could be, a late bloomer. They could reach those peaks of wisdom or intelligence, but just it would happen all at once, or it happened later or whatnot. So that was kind of what I was imagining with. It's like you were saying, it's not like a direct, just because you're older means you're smarter or wiser, but maybe the older you get, the more ability you have of becoming smarter or wiser, and whether or not that'll actually happen is up to the individual.
It makes sense though, because like in your very early ages, let's just say like 10, because you said 10 or 11 as like just exponential growth. It would make sense that you are assuming that you start at like basically zero knowledge. You need to understand so much about the world. You need to understand how to survive, how to communicate with others, how to do all these social functions and stuff. And then from a societal perspective, beyond school, like obviously in school it's very regimented. You have to do certain tasks, etc. But like in terms of like the overall society, you start specializing after that. You have to specialize in something. If you don't specialize in something, then you're gonna work at McDonald's or whatever. I don't really know what's gonna happen, but usually people tend to start specializing at that certain stage. So in terms of general knowledge and how we usually think of knowledge as like this overall thing, it would seem that it kind of falls off because you're learning less about everything as a whole and starting to invest your time into individual things. And still generally, probably as you get older, your learning capacity diminishes over time, especially after like 25 or whatever, when your apparent brain growth stops or whatever. It would make sense though, like even evolutionarily, because you grow up to this stage trying to learn as much as you can, then you hit the age in which you can reproduce, and then after that, your function in terms of just purely like the base of evolution, which is just like spreading your genes, like the not even doing like anything beyond that, like not like contributing to your society. You hit that point, and then your brain doesn't really have a need in the most basic sense to keep increasing anymore after the point of which you can do that. But when you go beyond that and you have to keep care of your children and all these sorts of things, then you start to have to specialize in things. And I'm not really sure where I'm going with this, but like at a certain point, there's less functional less functional need to learn about everything, like as you do with a child, but more about like learning for your individual sake and not like.
Well, yeah, and from the evolutionary perspective, like you're saying, once you already have passed on your genes, you might as well just die. Like
not entirely. You'll have to make sure that your children survive.
That's true. And I mean, it's provided that your children will survive, you might as well just die.
No, because you have to make sure that they pass on their genes and et cetera, et cetera.
Really, that's what I'm saying. Like provided that that will happen.
Yeah.
Then there's no more use for you in the evolutionary sense. But it's like, you don't necessarily the need for learning everything in terms of like learning things to benefit your own survival and your own likelihood of reproducing. That need is no longer there, or it's much reduced because you've already at least continued your genetic line.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, most humans over the span of history probably have done that by the age of 25.
Yeah, but like
if they're going to,
if you're to say, like, let's just say we have somebody that continues to exponentially grow like their wisdom throughout their entire life, right? After they pass that point of their like reproduction line or whatever, there's really no more genetic use for that anymore. So it's just a waste of resources at that point. So there's not really any biological need for that to happen at that point. And also it's just really hard if you're still trying to learn as much. Like if I today tried to learn as much as I did when I was like 10 or whatever, I wasn't a very smart child, but beyond that, like assuming I'm the general child, right? If I'm older, I'm trying to learn as much as I did as a kid. It would be much harder to feel like it's less likely to cling on to me. I feel.
Well, okay. I mean, yeah, it's what you were saying before is you have to get your parents or your children to actually survive and have kids of their own. That's definitely true. I was just discounting that fact for the sake of the lulz.
Sure.
Because if you were to continually increase your knowledge, that practically speaking and evolutionary speaking would be helpful because presumably that knowledge would help your children even more. So you can still.
But instead of them just learning it, you have to teach it to them. So it would be more practical for them to just learn it in the first place instead of you learning it and then teaching them.
Well, I guess that brings up the whole concept of like, is it more or less efficient to learn firsthand or secondhand? If you as an individual, and every individual that exists has to learn everything firsthand, I would imagine that takes much longer. Like, for instance, if you're a person who spends your whole life researching some subject, you write a book about that, condense all your knowledge down into that book, and then have a child read that book. They can read that book in a couple hours instead of having to do the whole lifetime of research on their own. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's why humans have been so successful, because we can increase our collective knowledge with each generation, because we keep on having people go specialize, return with the knowledge, and then that knowledge is more easily or like quickly given to the new generation. So you would never get much of anywhere at all if you just died after your child is born, and then you're like, yeah, you learn it all on your own now, instead of you learning in your post-child having adulthood, and then giving that knowledge to your children, and then them repeating that cycle over and over, like recursively. It's like that has, evolutionary advantages as well.
I imagine it like kind of like a circle of all things that humans know, kind of thing, and within that circle, at the center of it, is like a smaller circle, and that's like the stuff that you will learn at a certain age. And or like, let's just say until you're like in high school, that's the capacity of all things you'll learn. I think I saw this diagram somewhere, but anyway, when you start specializing in something and you get a PhD or whatever, essentially that's your progress breaking towards the very edge of what people know, and the new discoveries that you find out in your degree, or you don't even have to have a degree for it, but like usually people associate just that with like a PhD or whatever. You're breaking through that boundary of that circle of human knowledge, and you're expanding it a little further.
Yeah.
Is the pursuit of it, right? So that smaller circle on the inside will like be a little wider. So generally speaking, people that are, well, let's just go like they're born, and then they grow into their adulthood, and they know more generally because that overall human knowledge has been increased. So it's been condensed into what they can learn. Not saying that everybody has to learn to that extended circle. That's probably not even possible in our lifetime. But like, I don't. That feels like the purpose of like the knowledge to me, in terms of like what you're trying to get at, I guess.
What your thing of the circle, and then the smaller circle within it, and then expanding to like along a point to reach beyond that outer circle, makes me think of, I don't remember what it's called, but they're like graphs that you would find of like a personality matrix in like a video game. Usually it's like you've got like 12 points on the outside, and then your character can like, you could design it like, oh, I want to go towards like charisma,
strength, and whatever,
and then you have this star-shaped formation that has different lengths going to different points. It's
exactly.
Like, I have a high charisma, so that point in that direction goes way out far, but then I have a tiny strength, so it like that one's just still part of that inner basic circle.
Yeah, and you're using like your well, I guess in the human example, it's like your knowledge points or your time points or whatever to invest into it.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a name for that kind of chart or diagram, but it appears in a lot of video games, and I'm sure not all in video games, in other places too. But you said one thing 2 talks ago. You spoke, I spoke, then you spoke before that.
Okay.
You said at that time of how if you learned now as much as you did when you were 10, that would be not doable, or something along those lines. And I was thinking, I think it's in this particular case of you, probably, at least from observing you as a 10-year-old and now, and then me also from thinking of myself as a 10-year-old and then now, it's actually the reverse. I think you're definitely learning now more than you were at 10.
Yeah.
And me I'm learning now at the past, for my adulthood, than I was in my childhood. At least, I guess there's a difference maybe between like passive absorption of knowledge about the world that just happens throughout your childhood versus seeking out information and trying to like find that knowledge for yourself. Because definitely, like, in terms of being a knowledge seeker, I feel like that has only improved or only increased over the course of my life. And I feel like it looks like from your life's trajectory so far that the same thing is happening.
I think that might be like a bias in your observation. I feel like the things that you search for as being like some useful knowledge or whatever, or like me learning about certain things, it also happens to align with what you think is useful. What if you thought that, like, I don't know, like learning like philosophical quotes and like if you had a different
interest,
different interest in what makes someone like a knowledge seeker or whatever.
Okay, I think there is some degree of truth to that, but I also think there is a way in which it just applies generally. So I think people can be adults and reach this point, like say 27 years old in their life, like I am, and not seek anything out.
Absolutely.
Really at all. I mean, I'm sure they still have hobbies and interests.
I know plenty of those people that are all on Facebook.
Yeah, but it's not like they're actively trying to increase their scope of knowledge at all. Well, even if it's on like, memorizing all the Pokemon that exist, like they're not even trying to do that. They like Pokemon, but they aren't interested in expanding their knowledge of much at all. Or even if they do have a few things where, like, you could say to some degree, everyone is a seeker of knowledge because they really like this TV show, so they like to watch all the episodes over and over, and they know a lot about that TV show. Sure, but you could probably still compare that to someone else who has a more things in like a just generally increased scope of what they're trying to, the knowledge they're trying to increase. Maybe they also have a TV show that they're equally invested in, and then other things too.
Yeah, could be.
So I think like it might be true that it's a bias in terms of like of philosophical, logical, mathematical, scientific learnings that you and I both are drawn to, and I'm like, yeah, go us. But I think it can also apply in a general sense where like I do feel like I'm a person who, compared to myself earlier in life, is trying to learn more. I'm not even comparing myself to other people. I'm just saying, if I think of myself as a 10-year-old, I liked skateboarding and video games and making videos.
All great things, of course.
All great things. Yeah. And I still like those things. But now I like even more things. I'm adding on. And now the things I'm trying to learn about are also whatever I liked when I was 10 and more. And yes, to some degree that's true. People just, of all people, they just add things on. But I think like the rate at which I'm trying to learn new things over my life has been increasing. And I don't think that's true for all people.
I don't know. I don't really like quantifying this kind of stuff because it just gets really messy. In terms of like me, if I were to say that I've been interested in more things, like generally, like that's just applicably true. Like I am interested in more things than I was at like 10 years old. But if I were to say from like last year to this year, if I'm interested in more things or if I'm looking into more things, I would say no. Well, it depends how I'm like grouping things. If I'm talking about like philosophy, logic, I'm not learning a lot about like geology or whatever. That's like a new thing. But in terms of that group itself, I'm learning more things about it.
You're going deeper into the categories.
But if we're talking about just like learning more things like as a broad thing, like is it more useful to learn, this is back to like the other stuff we're talking about, but is it more useful to learn general things or specific things? It's
And I also realize what I said is probably a very self-aggrandizing statement, and I didn't necessarily mean it as that. It's like I don't think someone is better than somebody else for wanting to seek out new knowledge. I don't think every single human has to.
I didn't catch that.
Has to increase the knowledge pool of humans or anything like that. Like I think there's.
You just think it's valuable that if you do, or if you just find it as like a.
I mean, I personally find it enjoyable. So. I realized I skipped over one thing that I normally do, but before we get to that, what do you think the difference between wisdom and intelligence, or maybe you could say wisdom and knowledge? What do you think the difference between these things are?
This may just be from like the media I like group myself in, but intelligence is pretty easy to get an idea of. It's like just how much you know, how much you. Well, it's not even this, but it's like how much you can apply to life. Like the knowledge that you have is like, hey, I know water is H2O. I know that if I rinse my clothes in like cold water or whatever, it'll help get certain stains out. That kind of stuff. That's knowledge. But like wisdom would be like things that you can't figure out necessarily by repeating like a certain task. It's like I could give everybody the knowledge of how to remove a certain stain, but I can't give them any. It's almost like a personalized. I'm not saying there's personal truths, but it's like a personalized subset of knowledge. It's something that you discover, but it's not via specific mean. It's like you can learn the same wisdom, but not the same way. I don't know. I haven't thought about how to exactly define it because it's just more of like a concept in my head. But wisdom is more like a general knowledge of pertaining to whatever knowledge it is. It could be like I can't even think of like any like wisdom ideas or quotes right now, but like can you think of any like wisdom, like this is some specific
like a wisdom quote?
Yeah, or something like that.
One that I've always liked is wisdom is the reward from a life spent listening when you'd rather have spoken.
Sure. So we'll use that. Like there's so many ways to figure that out or to discover some truth in that. In terms of knowledge, it's more like there's a specific pursuit that you're looking for. If you're like I don't think there's wisdom in studying electronics or something like that, but there may be some deeper truth about like how it affects people or how how it has to do with, I don't know, I'm explaining this terribly, but because
I think it's a hard question.
Yeah.
Usually, I feel like it's often taken for granted that wisdom and intelligence are different things, especially like if you're a D&D player. Like they're two of the 5 or 2 of the 6 main attributes. But it's like when you try to put it into words, how are they different? It's a lot harder.
I could identify it if it was pointed out to me, but I can't really explain it because
this is my explanation of it, and point out any parts where you think it's wrong. I think that wisdom and knowledge, or you could say wisdom and intelligence, because I feel like knowledge might be the over-encompassing, the all-encompassing thing. That's just like, things
Sure.
that you know. The difference, though, within that of wisdom and intelligence, I think they're both having the knowledge to solve problems. But I think the types of problems is where the break between wisdom and intelligence is. Intelligence, I would think, would be more abstract, factual kinds of issues, like how to do a math problem, some remembering things about history,
Sure.
whatever that is. Whereas wisdom would be more in the domain of life experience and like how to live. So like, for instance, the question, how should I interact with my family? Or like, what kind of person should I be? Or like, how do I live a good life? Or how do I divide my time between work and pleasure? They all are like questions of how do I solve a problem that I have? But that problem is like making your life better or worth living. And I feel like those are wisdom questions. Whereas like, how do I build this bridge? That's an intelligence question. It's like you have to know about engineering and like, bridge building.
I don't know. I feel like the issue with that is there's scientifically quantifiable ways to know how you should treat your family and stuff like that, because you can take all the stuff into account, like how your family, like what their background is and certain things like that, and there's like a quantifiable way about like, okay, don't probably get aggressive with them, don't do these certain things. And it's like, I'm not sure how to.
Well, so what you're implying though is that wisdom is not quantifiable, or
no, not necessarily. It's just like, I don't think that wisdom is. How do you describe it? It's like truths about
I would say it's being able to. It's the knowledge of how to solve problems that relate to life experience and how to live, rather than like how to know facts.
Yeah,
or...
that's a fine definition, but I wouldn't use it that way probably ever, because I didn't mean it like that. I didn't mean it like that. Like, I wouldn't use that definition because I don't see wisdom that way, but it could be applicable in a lot of circumstances. I'm just trying to think of one that it wouldn't apply so well as, but I would still see how you treat your family being equivalent to knowledge still, or even like referencing like
intelligence, or because
sorry, intelligence. I think like knowledge is the grouping category for the intelligent. And
I was thinking knowledge is above, and then wisdom and intelligence are parts of that.
We'll use intelligence because I keep forgetting, but it kind of reminds me of abstracting it a little bit. It kind of reminds me of the Moral Landscape book, in terms of there's scientifically quantifiable ways about how we should be moral and that kind of stuff, which I think that's knowledge still. I don't think that's wisdom. That
you mean intelligence?
Yes. Oh my gosh, intelligence that we can discover those things and find that out. I think it's wisdom that you shouldn't, I don't know, kill like your dog or whatever. I think.
Well, wouldn't that fit in the same category though? Of like the Moral Landscape, you can figure out quantifiably that you're decreasing the amount of well-being in the world by killing your dog, because your dog has an experience of happiness that you can measure to some degree, and by killing it, you're removing that.
Yeah, with your definition, but I wouldn't call that wise that you know that.
No. I thought you just said it was that you shouldn't.
No, I was saying that's intelligent. That you
okay, you're saying that's intelligence. Okay, then with how you put it, that makes sense. So then, what is a thing that you think fits under the category of wisdom then?
That's what I'm trying to think of. I could think of it like if it was brought to me, but I'm trying to think of a great example. Like,
because I would think of wisdom as something along the lines of like, I'm having some life problem that I don't know how to navigate, but a person maybe who has been through it before would know how to navigate it. They've accrued wisdom from their errors in life, and if I asked them for advice, they could tell me.
I would think that would be wisdom, but you could still figure that out without them. Like, in your example, it's passed on from an experience of somebody else, but
I'm saying that person has the wisdom. They don't necessarily have to give it to me.
Yeah, but they had the experience of it, so they know how to maybe handle it. which that would be wisdom that they're passing on to you about like something like, oh, don't do this, or it's like follow your heart or whatever the thing is. Sure, whatever the idea is that they're passing on, that could be wisdom. Maybe the difference is the communication of it, because there could be some knowledgeful idea about like how you should treat people, but then without any experience, you could just be like, nobody experienced this, but we know it's true. It's some truth about the human condition or whatever. I'm trying to think of the distinction there, because I'm not one that uses the word wisdom a lot, because I don't really see any use in it anyway. But not any use, but much practical use in being like, oh, that's wise. But
wait, so okay, then you don't see any value or much value at all in things being like having wisdom?
I'm not a big person for using specific. I'm not a big person for using specific words to portray like vague ideas. I like to just use the exact words and describe it as much as I can to get the exact idea across. Because that's why I don't use the word wisdom and that kind of stuff when I'm talking about it, because people don't have the same definition. Like, we don't have the same definition. Well, I don't even have a definition in the first place. But in terms of like the concept, it's not the same concept. So I try to just explain as much. Well, I'm not explaining it very well at all right now because I don't use it that way. But if I were to explain why something is wise, it would be, I don't know.
Well, can it be just reduced to intelligence or no?
Can what be?
Wisdom. Like, can you just, if somebody says that's a very wise man, could you or would you be inclined to think of that as that just means that's a very intelligent man?
If somebody were to say that that's a very wise man, I would think that that the man had certain experiences that led him to truth about things, and what would make him not wise if he had those experiences but didn't learn any truth about it, kind of thing. So It's like, that's the difference to me. If they take away something like
knowledge gained from life experience, whereas if you had the life experience but you didn't get the knowledge, then that's the opposite of wise.
Sure, yeah, that works pretty well.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think that fits into my separation.
Well, then maybe I agree. Maybe I just wasn't taking it the right way. I couldn't understand it, but
I mean, maybe I didn't explain it well, because I was thinking, if it's a solution to or a problem in the domain of life experience, then it's in the category of wisdom.
Yeah, but I think the difference is how someone acquires it, because if it could be knowledge about.
So you're saying you can't acquire wisdom from a book?
Well, you can acquire wisdom from a book, but that's from another person that acquired it.
Okay,
you can't acquire it from just.
Isn't that the same of everything though? Of intelligence too? Like, you can't just,
you can just acquire intelligence. You can discover that there's
from observation.
Yeah, but
if it's a fact about something, like any sort of thing that it would be under the category of intelligence, that's something that you would have to learn from some outside source. Like, it's, if you're saying that the wisdom is the person who wrote the book learning the thing through life experience, and now you reading the book, the wisdom is ultimately coming from the person and their life experience.
Right, which they derive some like truth from in that life experience. But I wouldn't say that they acquired wisdom, but they aren't like. That was very hard to explain. But if I were to get some knowledge or some wisdom from somebody, and wow, this is hard to explain in any capacity.
Like, do you have to get it firsthand for it to be wisdom?
What do you mean by firsthand? Like, just like from
from a book, from living through the situation.
No, because you could get wisdom from somebody else that went through an experience.
Okay, so you can get it secondhand.
Yeah, or third hand, or whatever. Yeah, but I feel like there has to be somebody that experienced the thing, and then they took something away from it. They could experience something and not take anything away from it, and then there would be no wisdom in that.
Yeah,
but I don't know.
I think that makes sense.
I don't think so.
You don't think it does?
I don't think I'm making sense.
Okay. Knowledge get taken through life experience, whether that was yours or somebody else's.
I never use this word because I just don't like the confusion around it. It's kind of like faith. I don't use the word faith because there's so much confusion around it.
Well, doesn't it help to try to define it then, so you can actually, unless you're just committed to never using the word at all. Like, if that's the case, then I guess fair enough. But
I would say, yeah, I just don't use the word because it's too confusing and then if I do, I have to add a little like, here's how I define it and kind of things, stuff like that. So like, no, I'm just not gonna use it.
Okay. Well, the thing that I skipped is an introduction to you.
I know you skipped like the 5 years thing and all that kind of stuff, but
yeah.
whatever.
Well, okay. A reason for that is I think the 5 years question. Like, what have your last 5 years been like? Like, what have you been working on? In your intellectual life and like your career life and all that, is a less valuable question to someone who is 18 years old. Because everybody knows the answer, generally speaking, anyway. Because sometimes people go in depth onto their answers, and then that would be interesting. But a lot of time, people are just like, oh, I've been working here, and like I went to college for this. Where it's like,
I wasn't gonna talk about that at all. That's lame.
Okay, I mean, I'll still. I'm just saying that's one of the reasons why I was like, maybe I shouldn't even ask that question because like between the ages of 13 and 18, like
I went from extremely stupid to extremely stupid, moderately not stupid. So
it's like the main thing that you're doing, one would expect, is going to high school. But if you want to talk about that more in depth and how you have changed, do you think over the past 5 years, then that could be very interesting.
Okay.
But also before you answer that, the other question I was just gonna ask is like. This could fit into the 5-year thing too, probably, but just like generally speaking, what topics and activities do you find yourself most interested in doing and thinking about?
I'll merge them together.
Okay.
I'll start at 13. Let me think. So when I was 13,
very ugly.
Oh, actually, I think when I was 13, I have a dentist photo upstairs where my hair's disgustingly like long, and I don't know. I just had braces on. It's just like the worst. But I was living in an apartment with my mom. I think this is actually the start of when I went through my intellectual pursuit. Because beforehand, I wouldn't have called myself a Christian exactly. We're getting a little
Christian by default
into religion. Yeah, Christian by default kind of thing. Because that's how I imagine it. It's like, oh, I was raised this way. It's like I'm a Christian, but I still didn't believe a God exists. I had no experience with a God beforehand.
Did you? Okay, hold on. This is a definite distinction. Did you not believe that a God existed, or did you not really just take the time to even think about it?
I didn't take the time to think about it. I didn't believe a God didn't exist.
Right.
I didn't believe a God necessarily did exist.
You were just
either.
there.
I was just there.
Okay.
If I had to put myself on one side, I would have said that I thought that a God existed, but I had no interaction with it because I was obviously indoctrinated into thinking that a God existed. But every single time that I would try to have any connection or anything, there was just nothing there. So I was like, this doesn't seem like the Christian God to me that wants to have a relationship with me. I mean, I was
God.
Yeah, some personal God, which probably a lot of Christians out there will probably be like, you're doing something wrong, or who was there, or whatever. But that's not really.
You said you tried though?
Yeah, I prayed all the time. There were some, well, not all the time, but the best way I can explain it is, besides like the dinner prayers and like the obligatory ones, there were some certain ones where I really wanted something, not in any like, oh, I want an Xbox, I want this thing, but there were some really like heartfelt ones where I was like, I wish that I could be close with someone, and it was mostly you guys, honestly. You, Brad and Chase.
I wish my brothers weren't like assholes to me all the time.
No, it wasn't like that. It was because you guys. It's gonna get a little sad for me, but
That's okay.
It wasn't really Chase, because when Chase turned 18 and stuff, he didn't immediately like go away. He lived in the basement and like all that kind of stuff. He didn't. Obviously, don't have. You can correct me on whatever, because I don't. My memory at this age was. This is 14 years ago.
You hadn't yet awoken.
Yeah, I hadn't yet awoken in my memories and stuff.
The Catholics say the age of reason is 7, but I guess for you it's 13.
I don't even think it was 13. I think it was like when I was like a sophomore.
Bad joke. Sorry.
Anyway, it mostly came with Brad leaving. I cried really bad the day that Brad left for college and all that. And then not to call you out or anything, but it wasn't specifically after that, but after that, you definitely became a lot more distant. You were always in your room playing like World of Warcraft or whatever. I'm not like trying to like blame you or anything. I do that. Well, I don't play World of Warcraft, but I'm always in my room, very distant from
World of Warcraft.
My nieces and such, But I'm not blaming you for it. I'm just saying that it affected me. I don't hold a grudge against you right now, or like currently or anything like that. But I'm just saying at the time, this was after Chase moved out, and then Brad essentially moved out right after that. And Brad wasn't gone for very long. Well, Brad wasn't at college for very long, right? 'Cause you know that. But after that, it was he didn't come back for very long either. He started like moving as he does with his lifestyle, or he's going like LA,
to California.
Exactly. He moved around all the time. And Brad, as mom, and well, that doesn't really say it, but as mom would always say, was probably the closest brother to me in terms of like what we would do and like the sociability and how he'd always like play with me and stuff. So he left, and then my closest brother, which was you at the time, still a 9-year difference. That is crazy. I would understand why you wouldn't want to hang out with me. I was an annoying ass kid, but
the general theme of this is right, but the timeline definitely isn't right, because when you were 13, I'm 9 years older than you. Brad had long ago been in the college.
I'm not talking about 13. This is an introduction up to the stage.
This is the pre-13.
Yeah, this is pre-13. I'm gonna skip. 13 isn't exactly a good date to start on because I'm getting to the point. But anyway, then eventually you left, and then I was stuck with mom, et cetera, and then it was just very sad. And then I had to deal a lot with being alone. And I would say prior to me being like, mom was not very easy to get close to. She had a, sorry, mom, if you're listening to this, I don't know if you are. I don't think she does, but it's very hard to get close to someone like that. There are people that are very close to their mom, but I'm not, definitely not right now. But so what would happen after you guys were gone? What I would do a lot is I would sit on my iPad like an iPad kid and just like watch videos all the time. I started with Peanut Butter Gamer. I don't know if you guys know him.
I don't know Peanut Butter Gamer.
But if somebody out there knows Peanut Butter Gamer, you know how awesome he is. But I would watch him all the time. This didn't really affect me at all. This is probably when I was like 11, and then after that I started watching Game Grumps.
Don't know what that is either.
Oh my gosh, they're really popular. But do you know Ninja Sex Party?
No.
Oh my gosh. Anyway, so I would spend a lot of time just like watching things, and then a few years into this, I realized that I was so dumb, like really dumb as a kid. Like every time mom would like recollect on it and tell me certain things that I would do as a kid, I was like, wow, that's really dumb and stupid. And I think most of the knowledge that I had when I was growing up actually came from these internet people and understanding. Like they would make making like thousands of videos and all this kind of stuff, and they're always talking about games, and then, well, not always talking about games. They're talking about other stuff while they game. That's what I meant to say. But that the using the internet is an amazingly easy way to get information. I would always use it. I feel like that's where most of my I don't like using the word intellectual because that kind of sounds like, oh, I'm snobby, right? But that's the best way I can describe it. Is how I became much smarter than I was is by using the internet. I could look up anything. I could discover any. I could be like, how does this work? How does this work? How does this work? So I would spend all my time like watching these videos, hear something, I'd be like, oh, how does that work? How does, this system work? How does this thing work? And I'd always use that. And since I was alone so much, I would be just completely surrounded by it. So I'd always just be learning new things. I do that to this day. I watch videos. I don't watch Game Grumps anymore, unfortunately, but
why not?
I don't know. After COVID, they kind of dropped off in their videos, and because it was like they had to sit together for the show and stuff like that, so they just kind of dropped off. It was like one video every 2 days for a little bit, and I was like, no. I actually went back to them the other day.
Wait, one video every 2 days isn't enough?
They used to do like 2 videos a day.
I would unsubscribe from a channel that does that much videos.
But you have to understand, literally, I would go home from school. Yeah. The next 7 hours were spent on YouTube.
I'd rather be subscribed to 40 channels that make a video every month than 2 channels that make a video every day.
I wouldn't watch only Game Grumps. I would watch tons of other things. Like I got into Markiplier and Jacksepticeye and PewDiePie and all those ones. Yeah. But Game Grumps was the funniest one out of them, so which is why I mentioned them. But anyway, so this whole entire time I was learning all these new things. So over time, it wasn't very useful at the beginning because I was just watching all these YouTubers and stuff. But eventually, I got older and I started to express that I didn't believe as much in the God thing, which our parents are quite good believers in that. There came a point where as before, like I said, I didn't necessarily believe this thing existed. I'm not saying it didn't exist. I'm just saying I didn't believe it. Right. And in the encounters with mostly my mom, because Dad didn't talk to me about it as much, but I was like, I thought that it was unreasonable what she was believing, and I was very dumb in terms of like my angry atheism, as they would say it, or whatever on all the platforms, like how atheists are angry all the time. But I didn't consider myself an atheist at the time. I didn't really know that was a word. But I think the encounters I had with people that believed or like Caleb's parents. I talk to them sometimes, or I talk to Caleb because Caleb believed because of his parents. Caleb's one of my friends for you podcast people that are listening. But I would never have said that I started out as a believer. It's just that I didn't believe anymore. But my reasons or my objections to what Christians would say was very terrible. So after that, before I was, listening to all these YouTubers and stuff like that. But then after I started having like these discussions with people that like genuinely believed, I started to looking into that a lot more. And then my what's it called on your recommended page on YouTube was, I started to become more flooded and flowed with that. To this day, I still have that, but
yeah, I mean, it kind of traps you within the algorithm.
Exactly, it does. But then, so I would watch all these religious things all the time.
Wait, you're watching? So this isn't atheist content. This is theist content.
No, sorry. I meant to say like religious content in terms of like things that discuss religion, but it was, or is it just both? I think it was mostly atheist content at that point. Because recently it's been all theist content.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would always be listening to that all the time, and my brain being like a sponge it wasn't as much of a sponge at that point because I was starting in my teens kind of thing. It was constant inflow of this, and also this is where I learned how to like multitask really well from when people say they multitask well, they usually mean they can switch between tasks fast, but yeah. I meant like I would play Metal Gear Solid or whatever. I would have PBG playing in my left ear. I would have some other thing playing in my right ear. I would literally. Horrible. I'm trying to do it. I do it to this day, but the only issue is I can't read while I do it. You're doing a different thing with each hand, each ear, each eye, each foot. Okay, well, in my right ear, I would have an earbud connected to my iPad playing like some Twitch stream or whatever. In my left ear, I would have another earbud connected to whatever YouTube thing I was listening to, and then I had headphones over that so that I could I had headphones over that so I could hear the game noises when I was playing like Metal Gear Solid Online or whatever.
It sounds painful.
It was actually, I don't know. It was a slow build up because at first I would just play video games, right?
Yeah.
This is when I'm like,
it's never enough,
Yeah, and then
the stimulation needs to increase.
I don't know if it was the simulation. It was just like I felt so just like I wasn't. So there was a clear separation because beforehand I would play video games a lot.
Yeah.
And then I became more isolated. So what's the best way to do this? It's like my distractions went down a lot when I became more isolated in myself. So then I filled that gap in by playing a video while I was gaming, so I could hear the content of it while I'm focusing on something else. And then I had like a relapse from playing games, so I would stop doing that. And then what I used to do when I was cleaning my room, I still do this now. I play 2 videos at once. And I think, this could sound like pseudoscience here or whatever, but so don't, and I'm not even going to take this with a grain of salt. I'm trying to take this with a grain of salt too. But one of my ears is very good at detecting, is my right ear. It feels like, okay, I'll still take this with a grain of salt. My right ear feels like it can detect words and language a lot better, which could still be some brain thing. Like,
wait, your right ear?
Yeah, my right ear.
No, that's legit.
Yeah, that's a brain thing, right? Yeah. My left ear is a lot better at music. Which still makes sense because you're right. Legitimate. Yeah, it still makes sense.
Your left hemisphere controls the right side of your body, and it is much more adept at word processing.
Exactly, but
your right hemisphere controls the left side of your body, and it is much more adept at like things like music composition.
Exactly. So what I would do sometimes, and I do this now, is I play like a podcast or something where people are mostly talking.
Although I think it's peculiar that in you it's noticeable.
Yeah.
Because your hemispheres are supposed to be connected, so there's information sharing, so normally it shouldn't be like, I would think anyway, it shouldn't be like you have some distinct like, oh, my left ear is so much better at this. Like,
no, I can definitely notice it. Like when I listen to podcasts,
although there is distinctness with the right hand, most people are right-handed, and that makes sense because the left hand is word pressing. So maybe it does make sense. I just don't personally notice it with my ears.
I do notice it though because when I remember stuff, I remember it through my right ear. Like even if I'm listening on both sides, I remember if I'm recalling some audio event or whatever that happened. If it's words, I remember from my left ear. If it's music, I remember it as if I hear it through my other way around. Yeah, you know what I'm saying.
I'll have to think about that next time I have a tune in my head.
But it's really noticeable for me, especially as like somebody that was so invested in music and listening to people all the time. So I feel like it's ingrained super strong. And literally to this day, when I'm listening to music, just music with like surround sound speakers, I always have to set the one on the right closer to me so that it'll balance out on my left ear.
That's interesting.
Or if I listen to podcasts with only one like headphone covering, if it's over my left ear, I don't process it. Like, I process like half the information.
Wait, so which side is my voice going into?
It's on my left ear, and it's very like disjointing for me.
Oh, so you're probably functioning at lower capacity in this conversation because it's going into the wrong ear for you.
Yeah.
I mean, you can switch your headphones around.
No, that's fine. That would be uncomfortable, probably. I'm used to this slightly being heavier because it has the microphone all the way inside of it. But
okay.
It still works pretty well. But I'm just saying, like, I've, listening to stuff, like, especially when I was a kid, like 7 hours a day, it became a lot more noticeable when it might even be because I reinforced it by having mostly, like, if I had a headphone, it would always be in my right ear. Or not a headphone, like if I had an earbud in, it would be in my right ear listening to words.
Yeah.
While I play a game, which usually has like mostly music and stuff in the background, hitting my left ear. So it would probably even encourage that process more. But it's become a lot more noticeable now. So that's how I always listen to stuff, is like if it was in my room and I'm like doing something on the computer real quick, I always have to have my right headphone off instead of my left headphone because I can't understand the words she's saying. Or, if I don't want to understand the words she's saying, I do the left headphone.
Wow. Okay, I'll let you get back to your 5 years up to now, or more than 5 years, and all that. But all throughout what you said, I thought of 4 things that I wanted to say.
Okay,
so I'll say them. I'll talk for a bit, and then I'll put it back to you. The most recent thing I thought of is that whole ear difference thing is really interesting, and I wonder if there have been studies on that, and if there haven't, or even if there have, I would like to do them. Like, it'd be really interesting to get a bunch of samples of like people in conversation with each other, and then like retention of what the conversation was for each person based off of, and then you put them side by side. So like imagine like you're sitting at a bar with somebody's sitting in your left and you're on their right. So like one person is getting the audio from the right ear, one person's getting from the left ear. Which person in the conversation would have higher retention of the conversation? And you would expect, if this would be true, that it would be the person who's hearing from their right ear, and the person from their left ear would be at a lower capacity. So then you would think, like, if you want to perform well in a conversation or in a podcast, maybe I should take into account, like, which ear is my voice coming into people's headphones from.
Yeah.
So that they can actually be at their best during the podcast episode. So that's interesting. The other thing that I wanted to say is, you said you've gotten good at multitasking. You've been doing
only
listening,
multitasking.
And while it is true that the different hemispheres control the different sides of the brain and they have different primary or like preferred functions, I still am dubious that the multitasking is like good, or like, or you're good at it, I guess. For instance, people like you said, people think they're multitasking, but really they're just task switching. So when they are multitasking, for instance, by listening to 2 different things at once, or maybe to writing and listening, even if they're physically doing them at the same time, usually what happens is that the performance decreases in both things. So I wonder, if we did a retention study on you listen to video in both earbuds versus you listen to video in one earbud and different thing in left earbud, versus you listen to video in right earbud, different video in left earbud, and video game sounds over them both.
Yes, definitely.
I would think it would decrease as like your retention of information would decrease with each stage.
I'm just explaining what I feel like. Like, I'm not saying it's true, but
Well, I guess, I mean, there's still a difference there because your attention could still be good, and it just might be better if you listened to one thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still think it would be better if I only listened to one thing, but I think it's still fairly good listening to 2 separate things, because if I listen to like only one thing, let's just say like I'm listening to one thing, I have like 90% like retention in that or whatever it is. But if I listen to 2 things, it's like these numbers are completely arbitrary, but it explains the point. It's like if I listen to 2 things, maybe they're both at like, instead of it being split 45 and 45, maybe they're actually like 50 and 50. So I have like that 10% bonus. I don't know what it is at all.
Sure, yeah.
But it feels
it's not as bad of a reduction in performance as maybe other people experience.
Yeah, that's what I feel like it.
For your listening, yeah. I mean, this is also something that's interesting. Not one of the 4 things I thought of, so going on tangents. But, there's people who, I think this is quite rare. Usually people who think they are this aren't. But, like, there are people who have, like, enhanced or, like, super senses. So, like, they're super tasters.
Those are so dumb. Have you seen the ones with, like, the fry and they can only eat fries?
No. Or there's, people who have really oddly enhanced hearing.
Yeah.
It could be that you're a person who has oddly enhanced sound in this particular way. So that, like, it would make sense that you can do these, you can multitask in these ways, just because at a base level, your hearing abilities are better than most people's. Like, it could be something along those lines.
Yeah.
So the second that I wanted to say while you were explaining your sad backstory, is, I mean, I have a sad backstory of my own. I think probably most people do. Not to diminish yours in any way. It's one of those things where, like, everybody can have their individually horrible or great life experiences, but they're, like, at least to some degree unique. So it's everyone's, affected them differently, and it's not like just because my mom died makes your mom's death, like, equally comparable to mine. But I think what you said is definitely true, where, like, I would, like, withdrew from you, because I think it's probably true to say that I withdrew from everyone, or, like, I think, and I think that's still true to this day. I think maybe from when I was, like, 16 to now, I have been, like, withdrawing from the rest of the world. I don't know, perhaps more and more as time goes on, or maybe not. Maybe there's some fluctuation there, but, like, I do think that I used to be much more, like, outgoing and personable and all that, and I think I've been basically withdrawing to myself more and more, or maybe not more and more, but since then.
Yeah.
And also the same kind of thing is, like you said, where you were just used to play video games, and then you would play video games, and now, like, listen or watch a YouTube video at the same time. I've noticed that myself somewhat recently, where, like, and maybe it's this sort of thing of, like, sensory creep along the lines of, like, everybody has TikTok in their faces for 6 hours a day every day, because the constant simulation is too rewarding, or, like, just so easy to access. Or also the decreased attention span that it seems like everyone in the world has been experiencing the past 20 years, where you feel like you used to be able to read books, and now you can't read books anymore. Like, you just can't, your attention doesn't last through it. You get drawn to your phone or whatever else. So in the same kind of realm, I think maybe this is happening, where I used to be able to just, for example, play World of Warcraft, and just, that was it. Listen to that and play that. So the audio and visual and hands were doing that task.
Yeah.
But now it's like, a lot of the time it's like, do that while also watching and listening to a YouTube video.
Yeah.
Maybe like a debate, or, like, whatever, some long podcast episode or whatever it is. So that I've got, like, in my screen, I've got the shrunk windows of two things happening at once. Not at the stage where I'm doing three things at once, but still, I have noticed that I've gone from doing one thing and just enjoying that task to doing two things. And I wonder if it'll keep multiplying. Kind of hope not. Sounds like the fracturing of my attention isn't good. And the fourth thing I want to say is, I wanted to clarify my previous statement that sounded self-aggrandizing, of how I think I've been learning more and more, and a lot of people don't do that. Is, I think, to some degree, in a lot of ways, I've been playing catch up, where, like, in my high school or earlier, there were still topics that I was interested in. I like to talk about, like, metaphysics or whatever, or I like to learn weird, obscure facts that nobody cared about and had no value whatsoever, but they were just, like, random. But for the most part, I just didn't really care or put any much time into, like, learning things, where a lot of other people were at that time. So in some ways, I feel like doing it in adulthood is catching up to the level that people were at, or, like, are at now, because, like, maybe a lot of people throughout their high school are doing a lot of learning, and then they kind of slow that down in adulthood. For me, it might have been the reverse, where it's like dumb in high school, and then I do the learning when I'm an adult. So it's not like one is better than the other. It's like we end up at the kind of the same place anyway. Those are the things I wanted to say. So you can continue back to getting the audience to know who you are, where you come from, and what things you think about.
Right. Where was I? I was
talking about multitasking, talking about in the timeline of the story anyway, you stopped believing in a god, and you were having conversations with mom,
my mom,
your mom, and your friend Caleb and Caleb's parents.
Well, it's just, like, friends in general that, like, believe, because Caleb's parents were probably, like, the most closest and at the same time believers in a way. So they would talk with dad or mom about it, and then, like, I would be there and they'd ask me something or whatever. But the ones that really, I'm not trying to make this like I was annoyed by them, the ones that really got to me were definitely the people at Rockwood Church, which is my dad's church. They would constantly talk not going to say they were understanding, but they would always ask me after, I guess I came out as an unbeliever, but after they knew and realized that I didn't believe, they would always be like, "Oh, you'll find God eventually," or like
Right.
whatever all the sayings were that
you're on
they
the
would
path
employ.
still. Like it's basically like you're not really an atheist. You are a believer still. You're just struggling with your belief right now, and you'll get back to it in time.
Right, and that really, I'm not gonna say it really ticked me off, but it was
It can be patronizing.
yeah,
For
it's
sure.
patronizing. It's like you're not understanding what I'm saying. So I would, in order to quote unquote like combat these, I would try and learn how to combat these.
Right.
Right. So I would. I'm not into the part where it's like, oh, these are logical arguments and these are syllogisms for problem of evil or whatever it was. Right. It was just more like, do you know genetically modified
Sure. Yeah.
whatever his thing is? But he
Genetically modified skeptic.
I almost said that. That's
Drew.
yeah, Drew, whatever his name is.
Yeah, I can't remember his last name right now either.
He would always talk about and also Hemant Mehta. They would always talk about how to talk to theists.
Yeah, not necessarily
stuff
having
like
an argument, but how to actually just like
right, how to actually
compose yourself and hold up your own side. Except not an argument, but I get what you're saying.
But I still am terrible at that. But it gave me insight on how to try and communicate with people that are so reluctant to understand that side. Like even if they have
being a vegan helps with this a lot because everyone you come in contact with you is
I was talking to somebody at work yesterday about that actually, but
conflicting viewpoint, and if they learn that you're vegan, they feel attacked.
Attacked. Yeah. So yeah, I would follow them and watch their videos quite a bit to try to be able to talk with the churchgoers and such about my unbelief, and then some people started actually having like some points that would actually be like, okay, this is some weird, not like exactly syllogism where it follows like premises and conclusion, but they would always have like, look at the grand design in nature or whatever, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
To which I had to start switching
abductive
gears.
arguments.
Right. It's like I had to start being like, okay, now I'm not convinced by these things. It seems like something's off there. It seems this is probably when I'm like 15, maybe 16, which is why I'm saying this is when I was like a sophomore. I was like finally getting my cognitive breakthrough, but not breakthrough, but you know what I'm saying.
Sure.
But these were the points where I was like, okay, they actually have some substance that, as someone that hasn't looked actually into this a lot, seems like there's something there. I still wasn't convinced by saying like, you know, like a fine-tuning argument. I wasn't convinced by that, but it's still.
Well, yeah, I feel like to many people, fine-tuning or intelligent design, they are intuitively appealing.
Right, exactly. It's just like at face value, it's like this should be correct or whatever, and then so you look into it, you realize, oh, there's some actual issues in this. So it's like very surface level things where you find the argument, and then you start digging into it. Below that, you find the next layer. But then when you actually talk to them about it, it's different layers of argument. Like you could say, what's a good example? Let's do. Give me an argument for God. Like what's a classic one besides like. Let's do cosmological one, like the Kalam cosmological argument.
Classic.
That's a classic. So
everything that began to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause.
Right. So you start off with that, right? You're going to come to a believer after they present that to you with your first objection, right? And you're going to be like, oh, actually, how do you know the universe had a cause? And then you'll get to the whole conversation. I'm not going to go over the entire details of it, but you'll get through the conversation. And then they're like, oh, sure, the universe had a cause or whatever. And it's like, okay, I'll accept that. And then you get to like the next layer, which is something coming from nothing. And then you're like, how do you know that stuff can't come from nothing? And then this is like...
Well, I mean, I wouldn't even go as far as you seem to have gone. The first step of like objecting to the first premise, like how do you know that the universe began to exist? I can't even get past that.
Well, are we talking about universe or cosmos? I define them differently. I define them like a...
What's the difference in your mind?
So there's not like a definitional difference, but there is a colloquial difference in terms of what people mean. I got this from Matt Dillahunty on the Atheist Experience because I kind of like watching that recently. But so
he's pretty good.
Yeah, he's pretty good. The universe is a good way to describe our local space-time kind of thing, right? Like our idea of like the not even observable universe, just our current state of being, okay. Right? And then the cosmos is literally everything that exists.
That's interesting, because for me, like, just thinking about those terms right off the bat, like, I would put those in reverse order. Like, cosmos to me, I think of like stuff that in space, stars and galaxies.
Yeah.
Like universe, I think of everything that exists. But okay, sure.
I just define it like that. It doesn't really matter to me what it actually means or whatever. I'm just getting the idea across, right? So we have the Big Bang is what, as far as we know, like what gave rise, I guess, to the local space time that we have, which is, you know, all these stars and stuff around us. But we don't know, like, even if like the Kalam cosmological argument was sound, it means the universe had a cause. So that cause could have been a multiverse, some cosmos, in my definition, in your definition, the universe, that some universe generator or something like that, where it creates all these universes and we just happen to inhabit that. There's no...
Yeah, the argument itself doesn't necessitate God's existence.
Right.
Although, I mean, I guess if I was a theist, I would probably say that, like, if, you know, it's a cyclical Big Crunch, Big Bang thing happening, that cycle has a start, and that's what is meant by the argument. So I think you probably get around it that way.
But in terms of like what I was talking about with like the back and forth between what I had to learn in terms of all these arguments and stuff, was you start at the base level with the base objections, and then somebody comes back at you with some other, you know, like parody of it or whatever, and then you get deeper and deeper, and eventually you're to a point where it's like, well, I can't really say I'm at the deepest level, because I wouldn't know that until I actually learn more about it.
There's always deeper.
Yeah, there's always deeper. But like, so it would start off with like these basic objections where it's like, oh, how could that be, or whatever, and then they come up with something, and then you have to go back and whatever. Obviously, they have been taught like the same stuff from their past and stuff for all these years, so they have this repertoire of things to say when somebody says this kind of thing. And me being someone that's just going about it, obviously it's not, back to like the whole knowledge thing, it's like it's not exactly expected that me as like a 15, 16-year-old would have all the perfect objections to somebody that's a 40 to 60-year-old like theist kind of person that's well, I mean, that's the ideal case that you would want in a predatory debate against someone, is to have more knowledge on the topic than they do, so that even if you're wrong, you can still beat them in the argument. Right. That's how it always was every single time. So I would go back, learn as much as I can about it again, and then it would just be this cycle, and that cycle's still going to this day.
You got forged in the flames of atheistic debate. Kept on going back and getting honed further.
Exactly. I do that with Chase now too, but
yeah. Quickly, I'll mention, I don't want to let the cosmological argument go unbeaten or untouched anyway. One of my issues with it, especially when Frank Turek puts it, or William Lane Craig, is they misrepresent scientists, or at least they cherry pick the scientists that say this specific thing, which there's no good scientific reason to say this. They choose the ones that would claim the Big Bang is the start of the universe, where like no presumably self-respecting scientists would make that claim. Are
we defining universe as like everything that exists right now, or like our present space-time?
Yeah, everything that it is. I mean, okay. The particles that exist right now, even then though, like it's this, you can't really say it's the start, because the Big Bang is the furthest you can look back in time, and you don't know what happened before that. There was, you know, a finite point where everything existed at, but that could have been.
I think like the most basic objection that I first started with was like the whole time isn't even like time could not even, well, it's possible that time is not even a coherent idea because all of our equations relating to time break down before the Big Bang kind of thing.
Sure, yeah, but the thing that I was saying is basically that you don't know what, if anything, happened before the Big Bang. You can't conclusively say that nothing happened before the Big Bang.
Exactly.
So there is no claim that it is the start of everything. It's only just the start of this particular phase of existence. And there might have been more phases beforehand. We don't know. We can't know. So to claim to know is not actually doing science. So Frank Turek, by making the positive claim that the universe began, and scientists even say that, which that's what he says. If you watch his I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist talks, that there's like 700 of them on YouTube. That's
why I use universe in the sense of what our local presentation of space-time is, because when people say the universe began, they really just mean the big, like if a scientist said this is what caused the universe, they mean a Big Bang that expanded out into our local presentation of space-time. Cosmos is everything else.
Yeah. another issue, real quick, with the cosmological argument is it's a fallacy of composition. Yep. It assumes that because everything that is a part of something has a certain property, that the thing itself that is the overall, all the subsets of a set have a property, doesn't necessarily mean the set itself has the property.
Yeah.
You have to actually examine the set itself. So you assume everything within the universe that you have observed, it's a problem of induction, that you have observed began to exist in some way. And even then, the particles themselves, you don't actually have evidence that those began to exist. So it's kind of a self-defeating argument. But you would say that, this table began to exist. It wasn't always a table. Fair enough. But you can't automatically then apply that to the universe at large, because you don't know anything. You haven't seen the life cycle of the universe at large. You've seen the life cycle of a table being crafted, but you haven't seen the same thing for the larger category.
Even the table wasn't created; it was rearranged.
True. The particles pre-existed the table.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about a fundamental level of particles, the argument doesn't work.
One of my favorite objections to it is Lawrence Krauss goes into this in his Universe from Nothing book, or whatever it's titled. But I like refuting by saying, how do you know? Like when people are like nothing or something can't come from nothing.
Right.
You can't know that. We have nothing. We don't have nothing to experiment with.
Yeah. It's an unfounded assumption.
Yeah.
And then another problem with the cosmological argument is it's special pleading. Because of course, as an atheist, you can always say, well, if everything that began to exist has a this is why the theists say it began to exist, because they try to get around it. But if you can say, well, everything has a cause, then
then God has a cause.
God has a cause, and on ad infinitum, whatever, however you say it. And then of course they would make the special pleading argument of, well, God didn't begin to exist, therefore he doesn't fit into this syllogism, because everything that began to exist has a cause. God didn't begin to exist.
Exactly.
But really, that's another just point blank statement of, I'm just declaring this, but I don't have any evidence or reason to declare it as such. There are more problems with the argument, but that's three, I think, good ones of why the argument is not good, at least in my opinion. A lot of people seem to think it is good. It's as if theists, when they bring this up, they haven't ever heard of these objections, because why would I continue to make this argument over and over?
I don't hear the cosmological argument from many people anymore, but it's still out there. But I always hear moral arguments and stuff like that. But anyway,
or arguments from design happen a lot too, but they have similar problems. So back to your sequence of events. You're 15. You're getting into all these discussions with people at your church, and going back, learning more, having discussions, going back, learning more.
Yeah, exactly. And then eventually, another part of it is the reason I care, which is probably the reason why a lot of people care, is because there are certain doctrines, obviously, that are very bad. I have some friends that are bisexual, gay, whatever it may be, and to hear my mom say that these people should be excommunicated or worse, I don't really want to. I don't want to
speak ill of people who aren't present. That kind of thing. Is that what you're saying?
In terms of like me talking about mom.
Yeah, what are you saying you don't want to do?
I don't want to I don't want to speak ill of what like if I get it wrong or whatever or something like that. But the idea is there that I know for sure that she would say to me all the time, like how, not even that they're going to hell, but like what we should do with them while they're here on Earth, kind of thing.
Okay.
That stuff is not a thing I would subscribe to necessarily, which made me try and, because if people are like religious and they're just illogical, but it doesn't affect us so much, I'm not going to care as much. I'm still going to care that they're being illogical, but the fact that it's so present, like the homophobia and all that kind of stuff, and just the extremes to which it goes to, it frustrates me beyond measure. So that's what I really cared about it.
Yeah, I would make the argument that no matter what the specific doctrines are that may or may not be bad, believing in things that aren't provable, or things that may be irrational, or things that may be supernatural, things that aren't reality based, is inherently bad.
Right. I completely agree, but I'm just like,
they often and very likely do lead to actual real world problems and immoralities, but it's so on.
Extremely noticeable when they're literally preaching it and stuff to you. So and trying to convert you over to it. So that just hardened me. Well, I'm not gonna say like hardened my heart or whatever, but you know what I'm saying. It made me research it even more and try and look into it more. So that whole thing happened. I ended up stopped going to church, because at that point they wouldn't say anything besides like just like.
Wait, so before you stopped going to church, were you going of your own, so to speak, free will?
No, absolutely not. That would make me go.
So how did that change, though? Like, you just decided you didn't want to go, and
No,
mom and dad were okay with that?
I think instead of getting into arguments with the church people, I would start getting into arguments with Dad, and he didn't want to deal with that anymore. So he would just like stop bringing me to church, because every time I was at church,
it would be an unpleasant experience.
It would be an unpleasant experience.
Okay.
That may not be true. I'd have to ask Dad like what he thinks about it, but that's how I felt it. It was always unpleasant. I'm not saying I don't enjoy, debating people. I think it's kind of fun, but it is a little annoying where every single time there's zero progress being made or anything like that. I still enjoy like having heated debates with people, but
yeah, the debates can be fun, but yeah, when you can tell that the person is not open to it at all, like open to being wrong themselves, it's like a one-sided argument where like, I know for a fact that I'm right and I'm trying to change your mind, rather than being a two-way argument where it's like, I could be wrong and I'm willing to accept that, and you, I think, are wrong right now, so I'm going to try to change your mind. So it's like the mind changing can happen in either direction, and you're open to that. Like, if I'm wrong about something,
yeah,
then if I'm in an argument with a theist, like if they present me with a sound argument or solid proof, then I'm going to change my mind. Or so I tell myself. I hope that's true. It's hard to know your own psychology, but
so yeah, then after I stopped going to church, it was like a year and a half, 2 years, whatever. So we're getting up to the age of me being like 17, right? So it's pretty recent. Then Chase moves in, and we've argued with Dad before, and it's usually like, obviously I'm here when Dad's here, and then you're here too. So he doesn't try to argue with as much, because whether he feels like he's overwhelmed because there's multiple people here, and they're like, it's obviously pressuring to have more people on one side arguing against you than the other way. So he would stop arguing. But now Chase moves in, and
the tides have turned.
The tides have turned. I'm the only one in the house.
The turntables.
Exactly. And I'm not saying that they get into like arguments all the time and stuff, but it's a present looming thing.
Just on your graduation party for 5 hours.
Yeah. Well, it's usually when like parties happen.
Although to be fair, that was stoked by you and also me. Not just like, it wasn't just a as theists let's argue with these atheists. There was mutual argument going. Doesn't happen all the time.
More to the point, it's like I am now at a number disadvantage. Not really exactly like, this is not like present in my mind like, oh, I'm doing this now because I'm at a number disadvantage, but it's more like, okay,
you're not worried that you're going to be suddenly baptized in your sleep.
Yeah. It's more like I just have like this passive know-how that I feel like Chase is definitely more I wouldn't say more of a believer, but more of like a...
Chase is my brother, by the way. I don't think we made that clear at this point.
Yeah. Well, he's my brother too. But
well, debatable. Yeah, he is. So if you've been wondering, I think I might have said that name a few times. I don't even know if he'll be pleased with the fact that we're mentioning him. You normally don't talk about specific people so much in podcast episodes, but what can you do?
It'll be okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think there's anything bad about him yet.
That's true.
Not yet to mean that I'm going to. I'm just saying that like...
Yeah. Well, still, I hope it still remains a comprehensible experience from the listening perspective.
Yeah. But anyway, so he is, I would feel, more of like a trying to change other people's mind kind of person than Dad is. Dad is more of like a personal believer. He's more of like a...
That's true.
Wanting to change other people's minds kind of thing.
I mean, yeah, Dad has told me before that it's really just down to me and God, I guess, to determine my belief. Like, I have to just read the Bible, and if the Spirit of the Lord doesn't fill my heart, then, it doesn't fill my heart. Or so he says.
So yeah, and then I took a more logical, like literally logical, like learning logic, because the churchgoers are not going to exactly be persuaded by syllogisms and logical arguments and stuff like that. Like,
then why learn it?
I'm saying I'm not talking like the people at like Rockwood anymore. I'm talking about because even if I present a sound argument, like perfectly sound, like assuming that I can make like the best sound argument for them, they're still not gonna believe it, because they're not gonna understand that sound premises lead to valid. Yeah, valid and true premises lead to a sound conclusion kind of thing. They're not gonna exactly believe that. They're gonna be like, oh, still this thing. But then,
are you saying that other people will accept that?
No, I'm trying to say that what am I trying to say? It's more like the idea of at church, right? There is a time in which you still have to leave, but with in terms of Chase being here, the conversation can continue a lot better. That we had like a 4-hour conversation at like midnight once.
Yeah.
But when how am I trying to explain this? If you're at church, right, and they're saying something to you, you can just come up with like an objection, like a question, like how does this work then? And then they're gonna say something. But if you're actually doing like where he presents like the moral argument, or he pronounces, or he says like the resurrection as proof that God exists or whatever, you got to come with more with better counters to that, and especially if you are trying to read the Bible. I read like these logic books before I read the Bible, because I really didn't want to be duped by it. I didn't want to be duped by these things, so I want to understand how certain things can only lead to true things, right? Like certain things, like
how are you expecting to get duped by the Bible? It's not like it was crafted by experts, like
not really that.
It's logic.
I didn't want to be by any part of it, like be like, oh yeah, that might be true kind of thing. I wanted to understand how like logic works, like to its actual like function. I don't know how to explain it, but okay. So I was trying to understand, because this is when I also started watching like the Atheist Experience, because there are a lot of stories of people not understanding how these things work and then drawing conclusions that are not supported.
Arguments from ignorance.
Yeah, exactly, and that kind of stuff. Which argument from ignorance was like not something I knew about until that kind of stuff, and I was like, okay, so I'm reading the Bible, all that kind of stuff, and I'm like, this could work if you didn't understand like that this isn't necessarily true. Like if you make all these presumptions and all these sorts of things, it would seem reasonable at first if I had not understood how logic works, I guess. I'm not really sure how to expand upon that anymore, but my perspective of how to acquire truth has almost entirely changed after I understood like formal logic, in a sense, right? Because before I feel like most people who do this is they're just like, oh, it's possible that's the case, and it's like I can't imagine any other way this could happen, argument for ignorance kind of thing, and then it's like, okay, sure, whatever, and then you start ramping it up, it gets more extreme, and all these sorts of things, and people can end up believing crazy things. So then I was like, what's a system that I can actually figure out knowledge like reliably? Logic is a great one. Belief and faith is not exactly a good one for your information, but I was trying to figure out essentially what's the most reliable path to truth is what I was trying to do. Because before, as an atheist, I was just like, okay, how do I respond to these things? How do I communicate with these people? But then I was like, okay, how do I actually discover truth? Mm-hmm. I'm not saying I didn't know how to discover truth before. I'm just saying what's a way that I can explain to people and understand and be more confident rather than just questioning people all the time. I can actually present something.
Although I do wonder, though, if like the sort of street epistemology style where it's like Socratic method, where you just simply ask people questions in order to get them to thinking.
Yeah, it's a great one.
I feel like that actually might often be more effective than presenting an argument of your own.
I think so. I think it's more effective, but there are certain times where it calls for you to present your own sort of thing. But not even that. It's just like just understanding logic. It's like, okay, if somebody presents an argument, then you have logical ways instead of just saying, oh, I don't believe that thing. You could be like, that's true. That logically does not follow.
Yeah, you could attempt to show them why it doesn't work. And
right.
Hopefully they'll be receptive to that.
Or if it's like the modal ontological argument, if you don't understand logic necessarily, you could, well, if you do understand logic, then you could understand how to make like a parody argument of that. That's the opposite way. The modal one where it's like, if God exists in some possible world, he necessarily exists in all worlds. You could say it's possible that God doesn't exist in a world, therefore he doesn't exist in any world.
Sure.
Because he would necessarily exist, but if he doesn't exist there, then he doesn't exist anywhere. And that's, kind of down that route of like, when you understand logic more, I feel like you have a better repertoire for the basic beliefs that people have for those kind of things. But more to the point, I was just trying to understand how to, or as Matt Dillahunty would say, believe as many true things as possible and not believe as many false things as possible. Because if you only believe as many true things as possible, you believe everything. If you don't want to believe false things, you believe nothing. You have to have both. But yeah, that was more of a pursuit of truth. And beforehand, it was definitely more emotional, I'll admit. It was more like, I don't want this to be true kind of thing, where it's like, I don't...
Anti-theism.
Yeah, it's like, this is harmful. I still think it's harmful in a lot of cases, but it's like, I didn't want to, seeing as I had a lot of, like I said earlier, like friends that are gay or whatever, I don't want this reality to be where they go to hell or whatever, if that's true. So I was like, okay, I have to discover it for myself kind of thing. I can't. At that point, I was like, okay, if I'm instead of just objecting to what they're saying, I have to find a reliable way to get to truth. So then I did logic. So yeah, I guess that kind of catches up in a very informal way.
So your main interests then from that story, it would seem, are logic, debates.
Oh, I didn't really go over like all the musical interests and stuff.
Yeah. When did you get started being interested in music?
Okay, so I had a teacher, right? He was my teacher. He was my choir teacher, and he was
Mr. Zachary Moore.
Yes, Mr. Zachary Moore. He's a great man. He's great. I first met him in Bonnie and Clyde, which was a play we were doing my sophomore year of high school. It was the fall play. No, spring play. Spring play. He was obviously like the musical director kind of thing for it, for all the singing scenes in it and stuff. A lot of people liked him. Like, he's probably the best teacher I've ever met, just period.
Wow.
And a lot of people think about him, like a ton of people. Right now he's teaching at like some university in Austin or whatever, or in Austin, Texas.
I didn't have him as a teacher because he was far after my time, but I did act in a play with him.
Yeah.
He's cool.
The faculty there they wouldn't say this, but this was like a reason why they didn't like his teaching style as much, because he was very personable with the students. He was always trying to connect with the students, and they didn't want the teachers to be super close with the students in that way. They didn't want them to see him as an equal. They wanted him to be like more authoritative, superior. So they would always try and like get him to have like not disconnect with his students, but like be more with the teachers and less with his students, which he completely disagreed with that teaching style, which I would disagree with too, because that's dumb. He was super close to all of his students, but I think what made especially me really close with him is we had a very similar outlook on like music and its purpose and stuff like that, and we would always share very close interests. Obviously beyond choir, like where everybody knew him and stuff, we had very similar ways about pursuing just music generally. So during this was junior year, I joined choir for junior year, which is too late. I wish I did it earlier, but I did Dragonborn for the we were doing that as a song, and people, so
that's the like opening theme when you open up Skyrim.
Yeah, exactly. So the theme for the beginning of that year, the spring concert, was like video games and fantasy and that kind of cool stuff we did. Actually, I don't remember any of the other songs we did, but we were voting on songs. So all the other ones were like chosen by Mr. Moore, and then he was like, "Okay, I'll have you guys vote on one of the songs," and then we raise our hands, etc. And then we were like, "Hey, I want to do this song," and we put it on the board and all that kind of stuff. And then we're like, "Okay, which songs do we not want to do?" We crossed those one out. And then we got to like 3 songs. One of them was Dragonborn, one of them was like some other theme, and one, whatever. It was those 3. And then people are like, we want to do Dragonborn, but there's no like good arrangements of it kind of stuff. And there's no actual thing. So then Mr. Moore like postponed it for like a month while he was trying to find stuff for the other 2 and Dragonborn as well. During that month, I arranged it with a little bit of help, because I would just arrange it at home for hours. And then I would go there. He'd be like, "Oh, maybe make this note, and this," like little tips like that. And then I would go back. It was 12 iterations of it, which I would basically present to him every day during lunch. And I got really close with him because of that.
That was what sparked your interest in music, the Bonnie and Clyde play, and having a good teacher. That, like, were you interested in music before that, or is that really the starting point? Just like what, witnessing someone being really into it and trying to infecting you with that interest?
I was probably as interested in music as everybody else is at that age, where it's just like you listen to music all the time and it's like you listen to it in the halls and that kind of stuff. It's like, oh, I like music kind of thing. But what made me really interested in understanding how music works was definitely that experience and talking with them and all that kind of stuff. And somebody else being it's like, I don't want this to sound weird, but it's like you see somebody at a position that you almost kind of want to be at, where it's like he's so invested into this as his whole life is surrounded by this already. So I really wanted to kind of be like that. So I went, that's not the reason I did it entirely, but I went into that, into researching like music theory stuff and how music works after I realized the effect of it. Like the main thing that probably made me want to go into music was the fact that so many people wanted this to be like a song that we did. It's a great choir song for like a huge, powerful choir kind of thing. So many people wanted to do this song, and I was like, okay, nobody seems to be doing it. So I went into it, I arranged it and that kind of stuff. But like prior to this, I had virtually zero music theory knowledge besides like how scales work and like solfege and basic stuff that you learn just to perform. But then in creating it, I obviously took some creative liberties because it's not exactly designed to be, not liberties and like I changed it, but it's not exactly designed for that type of choir thing. So I had to add some little bits to it and change it a little bit and that kind of stuff. And it piqued my interest in understanding how something that seems so simple from the outset, like creating music, has the potential to be so deep and drawing so many people's hearts into it. It's like it was a choir of like 60 people, like 50 to 60 people, all there because they love music. Like, and that's an elective that they took out of their thing. Some of them think it's just like some easy A or whatever. But
that's why I took band.
Well,
I mean, I kind of like it was fun to like do the music, but mostly it was like easy A.
Yeah, but there was definitely like the in-group of choir that were committed to it, which was a good chunk of it. Like I feel like when I would talk to my North friends and North High School and West and versus my West High School, there were definitely some people. There were definitely a lot more people that are committed to the choir aspect in the community, which definitely had part to do with Mr. Moore being the teacher there, because the community that he built was much stronger than any other choir, high school choir that I saw at the moment. Obviously, there's college choirs that are probably more connected, but he was great at doing that. And comparatively, my senior year, which is my most recent year, he actually had to quit from the high school teaching, and he went to, because he had got a better opportunity, essentially like teaching at a university for.
So you just had him as a teacher for 1 year?
I had him as a teacher for 1 year. Yep. He taught there for 4 years though. So the people that were seniors during my junior year had him for the exact same time he was teaching there. So from their freshman year to their senior year, they had him the entire time. So they always made the joke of like, he's graduating with us too, kind of thing. But I had him for 1 year, which made that's when my musical interest was at its greatest during that entire time he was there, right? So during the next year, he was not there. Mr. Highland, while he's a great teacher, is definitely not in the same personal like league as Mr. Moore was. He's definitely a better musical player and probably a better singer and all that kind of stuff. He's been in the industry much longer. But in terms of creating a community built around it, which is arguably the most important thing about...
Or like inspiring students?
Yeah, inspiring students and this kind of stuff and making them want to do more.
So he's a better musician, worse teacher?
Yes. Well, not worse teacher because...
He still like knows the stuff and can teach it well.
Yeah, he can teach it, but in terms of making his students want to do it and that kind of stuff, Mr. Moore is leagues better. But yeah, so that whole situation happened, and during that year, I kind of had to disassociate my musical interest from being taken from Mr. Moore and more make it my own. I'm not gonna say identity, but my own thing, and extracting the part that was interest in music because of Mr. Moore and more just interest in music because of music.
No, I think that's definitely what happens in any sort of field. Like, maybe not always. It might not be a universal rule, but I feel like I've seen that a lot in myself and just like people that exist, where you get interested in the thing because a particular person, like a role model you look up to, gets you inspired to do the same thing that they're doing. And then eventually you kind of take it as your own instead of them. Maybe because it's like never meet your heroes kind of thing. Like they actually fall down in your eyes, and you no longer like them even, but you still care for the subject matter or the thing that they were doing in the first place.
I will admit, during like so I would FaceTime him. It was mutual. I'm not gonna say that. It sounds a little weird if I was like, oh, I'm FaceTiming him, I'm annoying him out of his day, but he would like actively try to talk to me and like try and get like to know what I'm making and composing, all that kind of stuff. But like in our conversations, I started to, like, he obviously knew more about music generally than me because of his years of experience, but there were certain questions that I started to ask that have like clear answers to them, like what are Zen harmonics, or what are how does 31 tet work, 31 tonical temperament, how does what's a great example? There's one that's I still don't understand. It's about dividing the scale into certain degrees, but I don't understand how those degrees are constructed. Or there's like Pythagorean tuning, or there's sub minor thirds, or whatever kind of music stuff, right? And obviously he didn't specialize in that kind of stuff. He specialized a lot in composing for certain types of choirs. He had a very stylistic draw to what he was doing, and he specialized a lot in that. And I was at that point trying to specialize in understanding very different things than he did. Like there was an overlap for a long time, and then I eventually started to drift away into the more, I wouldn't say exotic, but fringe music ideas.
Esoteric music.
Yeah, sure. And he became, I don't want to use the word useful because that sounds like I was using him for that kind of stuff, but he became less of a dependable source of knowledge for these ideas.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's just kind of like how it goes. Like you outgrow your teacher, even if you're not necessarily better than your teacher. It's just
I went away from his.
You part ways, and you not necessarily exact kinds of things that you are trying to learn.
Exactly. So it kind of worked like that, and like I was creating all these interesting ideas that I haven't seen anywhere and that kind of stuff, and he wasn't really a good source of input anymore at that point because he didn't know much about it. Because I was getting into like I was making essentially like a negative circle of fifths and creating these weird theories about how certain harmonics work and all that kind of stuff. So at that point during like my senior year, I spent admittedly way too much time working on that during literally. Okay, so my stats class is infamous for being like a joke class, but beyond that, so I was in AP Stats with two of my very close friends, and for the first half of stats, right, I would do stats like normal, and then the second semester, I did none of my homework, I did none of my, I barely passed any of my tests without doing like any work for it. I wouldn't even pay attention to the lessons because me and Michael, Michael's one of my friends that I was mentioning, but me and him it was so hard to retain the information because every single time we had to do it, we had to write on a we were writing on our notes sheet in front of us, but every time we had to look at the board that she was presenting everything on, we had to turn like 180 around to see it, so we would keep switching back and forth to try and look at it. And at that point I just gave up. Michael kept going, but I gave up, and what I started doing, I just worked on music theory in that class and many other classes. I just did that as my entirety for the free time. So when it comes to the amount of time that I dumped into it, it was hours a day, right? Beyond my releases, which I had like 2 releases in the morning. So I would spend like, actually no, it was, I think I had first, second, and third hour releases, or no, first, second, and fourth hour releases for the first half of the year. So what I would do for the first 2, be in the choir room, experimenting with different types of chord progressions and very non-mainstream ideas, because I'm not a good piano player, so I wasn't going to be like practicing piano. So I was doing what fit my alley and what I could do. So I would spend like hours a day doing that. And then come second semester, I literally was in a class called Trek where you essentially just teach yourself what you want, which was probably the best opportunity to literally learn that. I would just do that the entire hour.
Sounds like a cool class.
Yeah, it's a great class. There's people that like learn they're taking like pilot license courses, and there's people that are taking like all these sorts of things. And there's like an open master class that you can join, like log into it and all that kind of stuff.
That's cool.
It was very cool. So what I would do is he literally bought a piano, like a little MIDI piano to connect to the computer, that I would start Logic up, make these weird, cool like progressions, and understand more about music theory. And
so you learn Logic, and then you learn Logic the program too?
Yeah, I guess. But yeah, so it was a lot of experimenting. I didn't necessarily get better at performing music besides singing because I was in choir, but I understood a lot more than probably most of my choir peers knew. But I'm not saying it was useful knowledge. It wasn't like useful to choir, but there were certain ideas where, like just intonation. Do you know what just intonation is?
I don't know anything about music theory.
Okay, never mind. So basically, just intonation is essentially, you get the idea first by realizing that all pianos are essentially out of tune, because it has to follow 12 tet, which means 12 tone and equal temperament, which means that all the notes in terms of their frequency are spaced apart equally, so that you can play C major with the same note spacing that F major's in, or any scale or whatever. But just intonation essentially means if you have like a C major chord, if you wanted to make it just intonated C major chord, music is essentially just all ratios in terms of its harmony. So if you took a frequency of, actually let's just do A major because the numbers are easier. If you do A is the note is the frequency 440 hertz, right? So 440 hertz.
I know this because this is physics.
Right. This is music just breaks down to essentially just like tapping. So if you tapped fast enough, you could create
standing
music.
waves.
Right. Exactly. It's just waves. So 440, right? If you want to make a perfect fifth, you multiply that by 2/3. If you're gonna make a, I'm definitely doing this wrong right now. I haven't done it in a while. 440 and then 660 would be a perfect fifth, right? Which is what is that? E, something like that.
See, that's the part I don't know.
And then so that's how you make a perfect fifth. That's like a justly intonated perfect fifth. And if anybody out there knows music, essentially, what cents are is a certain, like, it's literally like if you're 2 cents away from a perfect fifth, it's, if I'm gonna do like a like that's a perfect fifth, right? But if I was a few cents away, it could be like oh, that's almost like a full step. It's a little too much to get into in this little thing right here. But essentially, I was realizing that if you're gonna try and make music, when you have instruments that can vary their pitch to a very precise level, such as singing, obviously, violin, you have the ability to start to be very precise in how you make it. And it sounds slightly better when it's justly intonated, when it's perfect intervals between these notes. So I kind of did that. I got some other people into the ideas I was doing because I showed them how these things are better when you can make it perfect. And what we would do all the time just for fun is we'd make like perfect intervals and perfect like sevenths and perfect thirds and all these weird those aren't weird, but all these interesting things out of it. And so I built like a small community out of that. That was like me and a few of my friends. This was senior year after Mr. Moore, because we were kind of like longing for more musical knowledge, because Mr. Moore would teach us certain like cool, interesting music theory facts. Mr. Highland wouldn't do that as much. So I created like a small community around that. Yeah. Now they're off in college.
Nice. Yeah, you almost failed your math classes because you were more interested in doing music during class. I did fail one of my math classes in sophomore year because I spent the whole class period drawing. And then senior year, I was skipping my classes because I wanted to read.
Yeah.
So not it wasn't as much as into the music thing, but I still had my interests that I would skip class and not participate for. One thing that I was interested in hearing, because you said that you wanted to talk about, well, two things. You want to talk about philosophy and like core problems, issues in it that you didn't actually say what they were, but that interested me. And then also you wanted to talk about Descartes and the principle of identity. Which one of those would you rather talk about? Maybe before you decide, I'll say one more thing that I had in my mind.
Okay. Like
an hour ago in the conversation, you said something along the lines of how you were originally like an angry atheist, kind of that like whole archetype.
Yeah.
And while that is like seen as some sort of like negative stereotype from like the theistic perspective of like, oh, all atheists are just like, they're mad. And usually they say like, oh, they're mad at God. Like their understanding of it is that atheists subconsciously believe in God, but they're just angry at him or hate him. And so they will say that he doesn't exist, although that's not actually the truth. Atheists just don't think a God exists at all. But one thing I wanted to say is that I think the whole angry atheist idea is at least partially justified. Because, like, I think the analogy that I like most is if you're driving in a car, or if you're in a car, and everybody else in the car, like the driver and everybody else in the passenger seat and whatnot, they're all drunk, and you're the only non-drunk one, and they won't let you drive. Like that's kind of what it's like to live in the world of people who believe in God as an atheist. They all are operating dangerously under these false ideas that is, actually has real world ramifications, like, policy decisions that are being made on the basis of fairy tales.
Yeah.
So I think it makes sense to some degree to be angry when you've come to the realization that everyone around you, or not everyone, but a lot of people around you believe things that are just absurd. And they continue to, despite whatever you have to say. I think some amount of anger is called for there, or maybe if not anger, then exasperation and frustration for sure.
When I said angry atheist, I was more talking about the perspective that theists would have of me, kind of thing, and how they think that I am. They think I'm an angry atheist. But from my own perspective, I would have considered myself more of a non-understanding type of atheist. I didn't understand, or even attempt to understand the other perspective. I think that's vitally important now. I always, as you know, I literally listen to apologists and
all day,
all day, literally all day. I try to understand it because I don't understand how you could have a conversation with someone without at least attempting to understand their position. But there's like a difference in somebody that is angry at people for doing something. Like, okay, here's a good example. When Sam Harris talks about free will and that kind of stuff, he shifts it to an idea of taking the blame away from somebody, and understanding that they don't have any, not to say they don't have any choice in it, because it still feels like to them like they have a choice, but it's almost as if they're duped into that by their circumstances. A good point of determinism is that you feel less likely to blame someone for something. You feel more,
Sure.
it's almost like an understanding of their position. It's like, okay, how could they have not done this? They were raised by this abusive person and all these certain sorts of things. It's like, of course they're going to do that kind of thing. There's the sense of blame is kind of like moved off of them.
Yeah.
And
I feel like a part of this that happens kind of automatically is like you put yourself in the shoes of another person, but not you specifically, just people. When you're imagining like, oh, somebody did this horrible thing, how could they have done that? You put yourself in their shoes, except you don't do it completely. You put yourself as you are now in their life, and like, I wouldn't have done that thing.
Right.
You don't put yourself as they are now.
Exactly.
So it's like, it's hard to understand why, if I just suddenly woke up as that guy today and like my consciousness just went into his body, I wouldn't be the one murdering people. Like, that doesn't make any sense. But if I lived my whole life as him, and like literally everything that happened to him happened to me,
yes,
then I would be murdering people. Or whatever the thing he did is that you're blaming him for and having a hard time understanding. Like, it's like this lack of enough empathy, I guess. And it's easier to find that empathy when you take account for all of the factors that went into what they believe or what has happened to them.
Yeah. I'm trying to like not be angry at people for what they believe, because to me it feels like as if they are kind of like they're like sheeps to the, I don't remember the exact phrase, but they don't really have a, not to say they don't have a choice in it, but you know what I mean when they say they don't have a choice. They were raised this way, their psychological processes led them to this thing. I'm not going to blame them for thinking the way that they think. I'll still object to it. I think it's wrong, but I don't want to be an angry atheist being like, how could you say these things? Like, I feel like I understand why they would take this position.
Yeah.
Even if it's not rationally justified or anything. It's like, I'm not trying to blame them for something they can't control. Like, right, that they believe these things. Because you can't choose what you believe. If you could choose what you believe, then that's just one of the stupidest things I heard. But that's a whole talking point about like how you can't choose what you believe. But
yeah, they
didn't choose to believe these certain things, and I'm not going to blame them for that. I'm just going to point out how there's certain things they just take that are not correct, or
yeah,
special pleading in that circumstance.
No, that makes sense. I mean, it's like, I guess what I was thinking is like from the theistic side of labeling someone as an angry atheist, even if they're not like literally angry. I just saying, I feel like it makes sense because yeah, there's bound to be some amount of frustration when you're living in a world of people who believe crazy things, or things there's no like evidence or logic that would back up those things. Did you decide on problems in philosophy, or unless they're related in the same principle of identity?
Well, I have been listening to presuppositions lately, which is painful.
What is that? Is that a YouTube channel or something?
No, presuppositionalists in the idea that people believe like...
Oh, just a group of people. I thought this was the particular name of a... Okay.
No, it's like apologists for stuff, and they're like, you can't have logic without God. In the same sense, you can't have morality without God. It's like, but it's separate when people are like, you can't make logical deductions without some God existing or kind of thing, which is what led me into this whole idea. So I don't know if you've heard about the idea of... I'm probably the worst at explaining this, but because I don't believe any of it. But when we're talking about how we get our logic from, is like the basic laws of logic there because they're true, or is it there because it's beneficial to help us in evolution? Is it like just a brain process? What Frank Turk would always say is like, how can you trust what you know is true and not just what evolutionarily benefits you? And what people talk about all the time is the laws of... So when we're talking about how we understand truth and stuff like that, we have to every single person has to make presuppositions of how things work, right?
Sure.
The less
Axioms.
the less that you have of that is probably better, right? For example, if I were to just take the three laws of logic are absolutely true as my presupposition, just they're true. That would be better than saying that a God exists and made those at the same time. If we're going by like Occam's razor,
it's less parsimonious to add in the extra thing.
Right. And what they're saying is that you can't have this without the God in the first place.
You cut out the middleman as an atheist anyway.
Right. So, but either way, you have to make a presupposition, and whoever has the less, like the less unwarranted presupposition, is more rational in that case, right? But how we get to understanding that those logical presuppositions are, I wouldn't say true, because when we're talking about if something is true, it doesn't really make any sense anymore.
It's a truism.
Yeah, it's like pragmatic. It's to the point where it has always demonstrated itself to be realistic or useful, and it's therefore true. We've seen how useful using these logical things is and how it produces true results every single time. Therefore, we should keep using it. It's kind of like that. But I was trying to remember. This is why I didn't want to answer it exactly earlier. But there's a book that Bertrand Russell wrote about the problems with philosophy, and I couldn't remember the exact talking point that he brought up. But it was essentially an issue for like secular people in terms of how you justify or how you explain that the truths of yesterday will continue to be like the truths of tomorrow, kind of thing. So it's like, how can you know?
Well, that's the problem of induction. It seems like
sure. you I haven't looked into that much, but
it's a thing that Hume pointed out, and probably people before him too. But it's like if you observe the same thing happening every day, then you would naturally be brought to conclude that it's going to happen tomorrow. Like the sun has risen every single day, and therefore it increases the probability that the sun will rise tomorrow based on all your previous evidence. But there is actually no way to guarantee that,
right?
Because inductive arguments are probabilistic rather than they're not deductive arguments, which are guarantee truth if the premises are indeed true. So it's like, if you think about it, just because the sun has risen the past however many days the Earth has ever been around, doesn't mean that it will have to rise tomorrow. There could be many of things that happen. The simulation that we're possibly in could shut down, or the sun could, explode. Somebody could shoot a missile into it from a advanced civilization to make it explode, or whatever. Lots of different things that could make that actually not true. The famous example, and I've used this like too many times now in videos that I've made, but it's the most famous one, and it's easy to come across and understand. People used to think that a good characteristic of what makes a swan is the fact that it's white. If you find a pink bird, it's not a swan. So the argument went, every swan that I've ever seen is white. Therefore, all swans are white. It's inductive. Except what happened in real life is that somebody, from Europe went to Australia for the first time and found a black swan. Yeah. And I guess they know it's a swan because it's, literally the same in every way except for the fact that the colors of the feathers are different. So then, their argument is wrong. Their presumption they had for 1,000 years or whatever is wrong. So with what you were saying with Bertrand Russell's idea that just because something has been the case in the past doesn't necessarily make it true, it's a real point.
And not philosophers, because they're definitely not philosophers. Philosophers. Presuppositionalists are always like, how do you know that tomorrow is not going to be utter chaos and every atom in the universe is going to fall apart and all that kind of stuff? It's like, okay, we don't know, but it's like the fallacy of tu quoque, where it's like to you too kind of thing. It's like, you could say that, how do you know God's not going to change tomorrow? You could just define him as unchanging, and that kind of stuff. And it's,
are these I can't even say it.
Yeah.
Presuppositionalists. Like what's actually the issue here? They're saying, how do you know the world won't just erupt into chaos tomorrow? Like, is that supposed to be some sort of, like, how is that a actual?
They're saying that God is like always the same and that nothing will ever change, and you can't have logic without God because God gives logic to the universe and stuff like that.
So they're saying because you don't know that tomorrow will be the same as today, your logic doesn't work. Like, I don't get how they connect these pieces.
I don't get how they connect either.
I'm sure there's more to it that I could look up and learn about.
Definitely, but I don't know. It's just going to one of their smaller talking points, but I think most of it's about they basically are saying, is it possible for you to be wrong in like everything you know? And then when somebody concedes by saying like yes, And then they're essentially saying, well, I'm not wrong about everything I know. I know God exists. So they're presupposing that God exists.
Right.
That's why they're called presuppositionalists. They presuppose God exists as their one axiom, and then they base all of their arguments off of that instead of getting to the conclusion itself. And every single debate you see about it, instead of debating how they know God exists, which is usually what the debate is supposed to be, they end up debating against the atheist by saying you can't know anything exists.
I mean, the problem I see here that I think you already pointed out was that they can't either. They just claim that they can.
They presuppose God as
right. They
as
can't know that. They also, the same exact thing applies to them. They just deny that it does. Like the same exact thing of they can't know what tomorrow holds, or that everything will remain true forever, or that anything is constant. They just act. They just believe that they do know these things when they don't.
Jeff Durbin is a good one. He's a pastor of a apologia or whatever church, and he always argues about how you can't know anything that's true without God, because I can't exactly get into the reason. I can't exactly remember exactly what it's saying, but it's back to that point of you can't know if what you believe is true or if it's just evolutionary beneficial to you. But the issue that comes back to that is that you can't know if logic is given by God or is some nature part of God, whatever. You can't know if that's actually, if we're talking about like truth in like, instead of like perceiving it as true and thinking it's true based on like all that you could know, if we're talking about like actual truth, like for example, like brain in the vat, right? Everything you know could be wrong if you're just a brain in the vat. Mm-hmm. But the issue when you say that there's a God that gives you this truth too, you don't know if it's actually true or if it's just, if the scales just tip towards what God wants you to believe. You still can't determine truth that way either. So when I was talking about Tukokei, I was talking about how the objections to it aren't that, because there really is no way to determine what's ultimately true. It's just bringing a God objection to it. This doesn't really fit into what we were talking about earlier, but still, it's
that kind of what you were just saying reminds me of Euthyphro's dilemma.
Yeah,
which I think basically goes as like either something is moral because God said it is, or
it's moral because it's moral.
It's moral because it's moral, and God is just acknowledging that. And in the one case, it's arbitrary because God just decided that it's the case. In the other case, in the other way, it supersedes God, so you don't even need God to decipher what's moral. And this, what you're kind of saying, is that it comes down to the same thing with truth. Yep. It's like it's either true because it's true, and God doesn't need to be involved in this picture at all,
or it's true because God determined that it's true, and then it's like,
therefore it's just arbitrary anyway.
Yeah. So it's like the logic, like if Euthyphro's dilemma is to morality, this dilemma is to logic or whatever. It's like,
yeah, it's interesting. And one thing that I wanted to talk about was what I was texting you about yesterday, of how it seems like CosmicSkeptic, the YouTuber Alex O'Connor, has been granting a lot of ground recently to Christians and thinking that Christian arguments are strong, and that it seems like he actually wants to believe in God and might actually believe in God if he is confronted with a experiential component, like a powerful spiritual experience that people might have if they like were to do acid or were to fast and then have hallucinations from their starvation, or have a near-death experience, any of the ways that people commonly come to find, quote-unquote, what they hurt God or what they perceive to be God. It seems like he's 1 inch away from that. I wanted to talk about that a little bit.
I don't think that's true at all, but yeah.
Okay, so I'll just talk about this for like 2 minutes and then we can end.
Okay.
Because you mentioned the modal ontological argument. And CosmicSkeptic, in a recent debate, although it didn't feel like a debate, conversation he had with two Christians, he was saying that he actually finds it to be strong.
Well, that's the Anselmian one. That's the...
Well, no, I think he was talking about the Anselmian one, but he was also talking about the modal one, because he's talking about possible worlds too, which would be the
I thought he was talking about how he... I watched the video just earlier too, but I thought he was talking about how he misunderstood the Anselmian one as a different form, because he was talking about how the arguments, because the Christian he was discussing with was talking about how him finding the arguments more convincing was almost as if God was revealing himself to him, right?
Yeah.
But he was explaining how he just misunderstood it, and yeah, so I'm not sure.
In either case, he was saying that one of the ontological arguments he used to think of as dismissible and no longer does. He misunderstood it, think it was bad. I don't know if he truly did misunderstand it, or now if he's misunderstanding it. But in either case, he has gone from thinking that several Christian arguments, although, I mean, I guess a lot of them don't even point directly to God, or much less a Christian God, so they're not really Christian arguments. But the arguments that Christians use, he used to think that they were quite weak, and now over the past 4 or 5 years has been going to think they're actually quite strong, and that they're logically valid. And he's the only thing that's keeping him from thinking that they're sound is an experiential component of...
No, I think they're valid too. I think the Kalam cosmological argument is still valid. It's not sound. Because valid just means that the premises, if true, would lead directly to conclusion being true.
Yeah, that one, let's see, that would probably be valid if it's all things begin...
If everything began to exist.
If it did, yeah, that one would be valid. But the way he was speaking was that he thinks they are intellectually satisfying. It's just he isn't...
Well, I think that he was talking about they're satisfying if you believe the premises are true. He just doesn't believe the premises are true. And then after that, he was talking about how it doesn't really matter if the kalam is true or sound anyway, because that doesn't convince people ever. It's always personal experiences. So he's saying, why bother with these things when personal experiences are the things that change people's minds anyway? So he's basically saying, where's my personal experience, I feel like.
Right, so as soon as he has one...
That doesn't guarantee that he'll do that. He'll still probably doubt it, but...
I would have thought that, but now the way that he's been talking recently, it doesn't seem to be the case. It seems like all he needs is a good secret dose of psilocybin, and he'll think that God exists. Like he said in that same video that he just needs one, and not even very strong, but like one experience of God, and he'll...
But it's not some like arbitrary experience of God where it has to be... I hear this talked about all the time from atheists. It's like if God knows what would convince you of something,
sure, yeah,
then he knows exactly what it would take to convince you. So he's essentially, for the sake of argument, assuming God exists and wants him to be with him. Why has God not given exactly what he needs to believe? He's not saying that any experience with God will make him believe. It's the exact precise one that God knows will make him convert. And he's saying that has not happened yet. Therefore, this hidden God thing is valid, or in that sense. But then other people are saying he's just holding off on you. He's waiting to get you stronger as a non-believer, so when you become a believer, you'll be better. And then he's saying, what if I die? Does libertarian free will exist? That kind of stuff. That's how I take it. I feel like he's just saying that if this God that wanted to be in a relationship with him had something that actually will convince him, why hasn't he done that yet? If he can't do it, either it means it's impossible, which this is the difference between omnipotent and like maximally powerful or whatever, which is a distinction philosophers made, because of the fact that when you say that something's omnipotent, there's issues paradoxically when you say like, you know, like the stone can create stone so heavy you can't lift it. When you say he's maximally powerful, you're like saying all
limiting to what's possible.
Yes, but it's like basically all all logical things that can happen.
There's my niece is making noises.
Yeah,
she opened the door and she's going, "Hey."
So when that happens, they now use maximally powerful.
Right.
So then you can discard all the paradoxes,
all the contradictions. Yeah.
So the issue is either God knows a way to convert Alex O'Connor, or he doesn't.
Yeah.
And if he does, why hasn't he done it yet? And if he doesn't, then why did God create him knowing that he'll go to hell?
Right.
And I think he's basically using that as a way to be like, why hasn't God convinced me yet? And because I think this more has to do with just like seeing his progression over his past like few debates and videos that I've seen of him, where he stopped he doesn't completely stop because it depends on what the debate is, but he's more switched over to using divine hiddenness as his main go-to for not believing, instead of arguing with arguments, because those don't convince people. Like, that's not what actually makes people convert ever. Most of the time. There's some people that convert because of those, but I think that was his point.
I hope so. The strange thing, one of the many strange things that I found was the thing that he was like, he just needs one experience. If I had one experience that pointed towards a God's existence, I would probably wonder if that was hallucination or some sort of psychological trick I was playing on myself, because isn't it so comforting to believe that I'm going to heaven? Or
right, but if that experience was from God, then it would be like a guaranteed one to work. So it should be one that I can't imagine an experience that would like make you convert or me convert, but God would know if that's possible. which is what he's basically saying. It should be, even if he doubts it to the biggest possible extreme, he shouldn't be able to doubt it, is the idea that he's probably going for, I feel like.
Okay, well, I think it's about time to end the podcast because the door to upstairs keeps opening and lots of noises are happening.
Cat's been released.
Yeah, and yep. Hi, there's a small child saying hi. Okay, right before we end, thing that I usually end on is solicitations of activities to do to the audience, such as good book that you like that you think people should read. Hi.
Read. Well, as a general rule, read people that you disagree with, and especially, I've been reading some Frank Turek, which is hard to read, but still. So, Stealing from God's a good one. Gives you some perspective on that. But if I'm going to recommend a book that is more intellectual or better, I would say, well, I'm a big nut for
Big nut
evolution stuff. So read some The Ancestor's Tale. That one's good.
Ancestor's Tale?
Yeah, by Richard Dawkins. I like that one a lot. It's really big, but it's basically, you can go to any chapter and it's like a whole spiel about like, so it starts off with like starting at humans and it goes back to the evolutionary line. Essentially, it's like explaining all these things, and so it's like humans and apes and then all the way out until it's like the primordial goop, but not really that because it's creationist talk. But
cool. I'll have to check that one out. I haven't read that one. All right, so thank you for being on this episode of the podcast. Thank you for listening. Bye. Bye. Yeah, that's what Una says. All right, well.